Thank you, sir. Thank you.
My colleague will join. So we've been holding SKF for a long time. In fact, I run a large cap fund. Somehow SKF was there in that. And
Sachin?
Hi.
Hi. Manish. Ashish.
I don't think we have met. Have we?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Even I don't remember.
Sorry. With your permission, can we?
They are recording
They are
here
recording
also,
in
but we
They are
will.
recording in
It's better for us because
That's fine.
Maybe regulations. So it's better that way.
That's fine. Get the booth, they get distracting all this stuff in the middle. All right.
so you want to start or should I?
Yeah.
Okay, she began with saying you'll hold SK for a long time.
Yeah,
she
holding
is
for a
actually-
much longer time and happy shareholders, so to say.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. Just that, what primary, I would say now amongst the bearing, we all have, Dimkin also, Chandler also. So just from an perspective or the differential that we find, it's always been a case is that our traded proportion is much higher and industrial is essentially going through this, whereas others have export opportunities also. And also in terms of the growth, there has been a certain, I would say a small differential which we have been seeing of late. So if you could just start with what's your outlook in the business, maybe from auto, industrial, within auto, two-wheeler versus and the EV disruption. So maybe this is what broadly we want to cover. And
Sure.
as the discussion progresses, we might just.
And maybe if I can add a slightly a broader question, because when I look at a 10-year outcome for our company, maybe whichever metrics it's a high single-digit growth company. So I'm not looking for a guidance, but how should we as a shareholder think about it? Because I keep hearing that our Capex is also going to be, let's say, in the range of 100 or crore, which is, let's say, maybe just around 2x of our depreciation rate. So if you can help us think around that, it should be quite
Sure.
helpful.
And you're right, we won't give any forward guidance, of
Yes,
course.
yes, certainly.
Yeah.
But let me start with your question. We can jump in with that question. We can probably go back and forth.
Yes.
So certainly our business is approximately half industrial, half automotive. And that mix is likely to change going forward because globally we are 70% industrial, 30% automotive.
Right.
So logic says that over time we will gravitate towards a global mix. Our automotive, so we have 3 factories in India, and our automotive lines are almost fully 95% manufactured locally. So high degree of localization in automotive. On the industrial side, it's about 35-65. So 35% sourced locally and 65% imported. Now, why is that the case? Because industrial has a very large assortment of bearings. Unlike automotive, when you run a line, you can spit out 10 million bearings a year, on one line, and we don't need to change anything there because the volumes are like that. On the industrial, the batch sizes are much smaller sometimes, and there's a long tail of SKUs. So it's unless you consolidate volumes across countries or you have a large scale within the country, it always makes sense, at least for us, and I won't come in competition here, at least for us to be able to source from factories where we have scale. Over time, as our scale improves or we're able to consolidate volumes in the region, we will also start taking a look at what more can we localize in India. But having said that, our goal is to localize as much as possible on the industrial side also. Specifically, Swati, your question on what growth.
So, no, just before that, when you say localize, unfortunately, most of the industrial comes as a traded proportion, and that's probably coming from that Ahmedabad.
No,
Not
no, that's not true. Our lines, we have 3 factories: Bangalore, Haridwar, and Pune. And Haridwar, I think, is mainly automotive, but Bangalore and Pune also produce industrial. Ahmedabad is set up for large size bearings. And it's very important. Sometimes we get caught in this discussion that Ahmedabad is, why is it Ahmedabad and why is it not Pune, or why is it Pune and not Ahmedabad? Depends only on the size of the bearing. So Ahmedabad is set up for large size bearings. These bearings are as large as this room, or even for wind turbines, for railway, etc. We don't have that capability in Pune and Bangalore. So as and when the market, I get asked all the time, where will you invest? Will you invest Capex in Ahmedabad or Bangalore, Pune? And my response always has been consistent. It depends on where the growth is coming from, because the capabilities are different in the factories. If the wind business grows, even if we want to, we can't make those bearings in Pune. We have to make it in Ahmedabad. But if the electrical motor business grows, we have to make it in Pune. We can't make it in Ahmedabad. It's a very different.
So at the group level, it is driven by the size of the bearing.
Yes, because there are certain competencies which are linked to size, even in terms of sourcing of material, competencies, the way channels are set up, etc. So it's purely linked to the size of the bearing. Therefore, internally we refer to Ahmedabad as a large size bearing factory, and medium and small is in Bangalore and Pune.
So what could drive, let's say, the industrials manufacturing growing in, let's say, I'm saying from an application point of view, what could drive our industrial manufacturing and therefore localization also? Which industries or which?
Sure. Industrial, as you well know, covers a full range of industries. The big ones are railways and wind, the large size bearings in Ahmedabad. That's a big, I mean that.
Right.
Then there is a whole lot of industries. There is heavy industry, which includes steel, cement, construction equipment, textiles, F&B, electrical motors, a whole lot of industries. In general, it's really difficult to pinpoint which sector will drive growth, but at least our experience in the last 2 to 3 years has been it's mainly infrastructure led. So steel, cement, construction equipment, that's clearly driving the growth for manufacturing and therefore also for SKF. And therefore, the growth being driven by these industries, which means our sourcing has actually increased from Pune and Bangalore versus Ahmedabad. And that's the point I was making earlier.
Sure. And that would lead to further localization also. Yes.
Absolutely. Because, as and when those factories cater to both automotive and industrial. And as and when we have higher demand from industrial, we will have to localize more and more. Because it is frankly, bearings is an industry or even a product where it is very difficult sometimes to import on a sustainable basis. Because customers also need quick delivery.
Just in time.
You cannot have bearings being made in Italy, and when the guy places an order, you say, okay, I'll produce it, then ship it to you. By which time you will go to some other player.
But that also then conversely true that exports opportunity for us. Will that also?
Well,
it's
a philosophical discussion here. So unlike, let's say, competition that you mentioned, SKF has always believed globally to being as close to customers as possible. So exports has never been our focus here. We use exports to fill in our spare capacity. We don't have people going out and chasing export opportunities. So we don't have someone, okay, let's go. Unless and until it is the consolidation of volume to build scale, to launch new manufacturing in India or Malaysia or wherever it might be. But we don't have sales teams out there chasing new export opportunities.
So I actually, especially in the industrials engineering space, what we have seen is certain geographies become much more cost effective and therefore, they have natural advantage from an economics point of view. Like Cummins has for low horsepower engines. or
Well, it
something like
depends
that.
on
That, is there any?
Well, I don't know Cummins that well. It also depends on the material content. You have to understand that steel is about 50% plus of a bearing. The labor component, actually not that much.
Not that much.
So, from a cost competitive standpoint,
Understood.
it's
Yeah, so I think we left it at.
I want to go to automotive. You asked about automotive various segments. So automotive, as you know, are basically four segments: two-wheelers, passenger, commercial, and agricultural tractors. About half our automotive business is two-wheelers, and the rest is kind of evenly split between the other three. Two-wheelers has always been a strong growth market for us, both aftermarket and OEMs, and we don't see any signs of that changing anytime in the future. If anything, our aftermarket business will be doing more and much better going forward.
So roughly, auto should be 30% of our business on an
50%.
No.
No, OE actually you meant
Sorry,
OE.
OE should be 30% of our business.
Well, it's about half of. You can just say it's automotive is half, 50%. In that, two-wheelers is approximately half. In that, half is. I'm giving you a broad directional number. What does it come to? 25%?
Yeah. And you said within aftermarket, you said it is again spread across, or it is largely two-wheeler dependent?
Aftermarket is about 80% two-wheeler dependent. So two-wheeler is our strength.
And okay, because the bearings are more specialized in PV, and this is two-wheeler is more wear and tear, and that's why dependence on two-wheeler is more.
No. Scott, I think you can have an equally large business in passenger and commercial, etc. also. It's just that traditionally, our legacy, at least in India, has been very, very strong partnerships with large two-wheeler manufacturers. So not the least that, the Kinetics, the Bajaj, etc. We have been working so closely with them for decades now. So that's the reason. In passenger vehicles, we don't have a great share. And largely because the passenger vehicle market in India is driven by Japanese and Korean manufacturers, the car manufacturers. And most decisions on bearings, therefore, are also made in those mother countries. So it will also go to Korean and Japanese bearing manufacturers who are pretty niche and pretty small, but they have a big play in those manufacturers. On commercial, where there are large Indian players, we also have a very large share. Okay, but I say in terms of volume, the commercial volume is of course nowhere close to two-wheeler volume, simply by virtue of some more vehicles on the road. Exactly.
Same should be true for every as well.
Same thing. Again, the Sonalikas of the world, Escorts, we have a large share there, but again, just the volume is never will be as large as two-wheelers out on the roads.
So because we are largely again aftermarket dependent, this OE decline, so this auto two-wheeler decline is almost like 35% from peak of.
Lunch is done.
Yeah. Can I get a coffee or tea or something?
No, I'm fine.
Are you okay?
No, I'm fine.
Can I get a cup of black coffee, please?
Yes.
No, it's not largely aftermarket led. It's about half aftermarket and OEMs. The OEM declines certainly affect us. Okay. Now it depends who you talk to. They'll tell you the decline is a blip or a trend, and I have an opinion on that, and I'm sure you have an opinion on that also.
And what's your view?
My view is that it's not a trend. Okay. My view is it's a short-term issue and we'll bounce back. But we can discuss that later on. On the aftermarket side, it is something that we have pushed very hard in the last 1 year. I think I mentioned this in the past also to some other people. we really see a big opportunity in the aftermarket because the aftermarket is a space where we traditionally have not focused a lot. We have a very small share in the aftermarket, and we're talking of low single digits. It's as low as that.
Oh.
Yeah. And just by your how big the opportunity can be. It's not like it's like a 30% share. And why it's important, so there's an opportunity for growth is much more. And why it's important is because the margins naturally are higher in aftermarket.
But this is again dominated by the local players and maybe because no taxes and other stuff.
The two-wheeler aftermarket?
Yeah.
The aftermarket is dominated by availability and price. It really doesn't matter. And I hate saying this, it really doesn't matter what brand you have. And I wish it was better, but it's not. So therefore, in the aftermarket, the drivers are availability and price. If you walk into a garage with your, walking your scooter, you really want to get that scooter fixed and drive away. You won't stand there and say, I want to escape from it. Very often you won't even know what's there inside. You won't even know. You just tell the mechanic, where in a camera, change it. He'll see what's in it in his shop, he'll fix it. And therefore, the driver there is availability and reach. And so availability and price. So therefore, we have done a lot of effort in the last 1 year to really get into a large distribution model for aftermarket, which we have never tried before. So, and this means, in the past, our model has been distribution led. Let's sell to distributors and then they will sell. So it's more been a push model. We now want to get into a pull model, but pull not so much for consumers because you and I really don't care, but pull from mechanics and pull from retailers. That's the change we're driving.
Actually, I was just seeing this number on our revenue side from, of course, our worksheet. So the numbers may be approximation at best. So 2014, this aftermarket auto was 13.5, and today it is already 16.8 or something. That's 17, closer to 17, yeah,
Okay.
of revenue.
Okay.
So we have seen that increase,
Yeah.
and same is in industrial aftermarket also. So
Yes.
are we doing something on industrial?
Similar.
Also?
Similar. The only difference is what drives growth in industrial is different from automotive. In automotive, it's a question of availability and pricing. In industrial, it is not that, because industrial guys know what bearing is in the machine,
Sure.
and they won't take a chance because they don't want the machine to stop working. In fact, we had an interesting case, and I will not name the company, but you can guess. One of the largest multinational F&B manufacturers in the country, and they had this. They have a plant in North India where they make dairy products. And they had a situation where they ran out, something happened to their machines and the bearings failed. And they wanted to get SKF bearings because they knew SKF was in it. And they went out, they couldn't find SKF bearings. So they went out and they bought a bearing that they thought was SKF, but was counterfeit. So the guy, someone sold them an SKF bearing. And the interesting thing is, they paid a 45% premium for a counterfeit brand. So in industrial, the issue is different. They want to pay the premium, but they want the genuine product. So industrial cases, that how can we make sure that our bearings are available in those at those OEMs when they need it. So not a price game there.
But how do we ensure? Because this is, sorry to say, it is our failure.
Oh,
that
agreed.
A knowledgeable customer is not able to do it.
Agreed, absolutely. So industrial, it's a question of, so we've just launched on Jan 1st last year, right? The e-shop? Yeah. Last year. We have launched an e-shop. So today our distributors serve about 10,000 pin codes of the 20,000 in the country. The other 10,000 that are not being served, you're right, Sachin is suffering. And how do we make sure that the other 10,000 pin codes also get serviced? So e-shop is one initiative towards that. They can go online, it's e-shop or SKF, whatever it is, and they can order a bearing and it gets shipped to them in a certain period of time. But in adding more distributors, digital ordering, having sure our sales guys are out there, etc. It's a number of things. But to your point, distribution has to increase over time. It has to, for no other reason, but it is highly margin accretive.
So, industrial, isn't it an easier low-hanging fruit that you can,
The low-hanging fruit is covered.
it's already
In the
covered?
10,000 pin codes. It is that one plant in, I don't know, pick some obscure town, in Faizabad, in UP, where because there's one customer there, how do we service that one customer? That's a high hanging fruit. Because Lucknow, we've got it covered. That's easy.
And in auto aftermarket, how is the unorganized activity now?
Unorganized?
Yeah.
I think it's, I don't know the latest number, but I think about one in 4 bearings sold in the country
It's unorganized.
is unorganized, and by that I mean both no brand imports from Eastern Europe or China, as well as counterfeits. Okay, it's 1 in 4. I think that number, anecdotally, I think it's going down. I have no data to prove it, to back it up, but just anecdotally.
So if I were to go back to your opening statement where you said that logically we should migrate towards 70-30 number, more towards industrial versus 50-50. So how are we going to travel that path?
It's linked 2 paths. One path is the natural organic growth in the industry. We do expect industrial markets to grow faster than automotive markets. That's the organic growth. The other one is that we also have to, we are focusing a lot more on industrial now. And maybe you don't see the movement in your numbers here, but our industrial percentages are inching up slowly. Maybe it was, so little by little it's going up. So it's because industrial is frankly where the margins are. Industrial is where the margins are. Automotive is such a dog-eat-dog business. When you go to Maruti, they just want the lowest price.
That's globally also the same.
Globally
picture,
same?
I suppose.
It's the same thing globally.
Single-digit margins for auto.
It's not different. It's not different. We need to have automotive right now. It's a big part of the business. It also keeps the factories running. We need that. Absorption of fixed costs and all that stuff. But in the long term, we need to get to that 730. Now, when the long term will be, I don't know. But in the long term, before I'm getting there.
So, like you said, expect the industry to grow faster. That's the natural part. But then there is the other way, which is there a gap that we need to introduce more products or more attention?
It's not more products, it's more localization. Well, I think we have the full portfolio. Today we import from around the world. That needs to change. For the reason I explained earlier on, to sell to an industrial customer, you can't promise them 10 weeks of delivery. You need to promise them a reasonable delivery. So it's more localization.
Sorry, you said there are 2 paths to address. So you mentioned that industrial market growth is higher.
And second is us. What we need to do differently, which is things like localization, etc. And localization, by the way, is not just on what we make, also what we source. So when we source steel, for example, how much steel can be localized? It's also components localization.
And maybe just one stretch more, but what are we doing to achieve this our side of the field?
It starts with steel sourcing. Okay, that's 50% plus of our cost is steel. It starts with, and bearing steel, by the way, is extreme high quality steel. This is not
locally produced.
No, it is very difficult. It takes a lot of hard work to qualify a steel mill. Unlike, let's say, a car body steel. But it takes a lot of hard work to approve a local steel supplier. You need metallurgy, chemistry, manufacturing, quality, EHS, a number of things. It's I think one of the highest quality steels that you can produce is bearing steel. So it takes a lot of hard work. Now you might think India is today the second largest steel producer in the country in the world, but not many steel mills in the country even today are capable of producing bearing steel. So it really starts at that level. You cannot localize anything. We can't make bearings here. We can, of course, but if you're importing steel from China or Europe, it's not the same. So in the last 2 years, we have gone up from, I think, 5 steel mills to now 7 or 8 steel mills. They're locally approved steel mills. And then the next stage is components. Bearings are fairly, they're fairly simple. There are 2 rings, it's got balls, and it's got a cage. 4 components, making it simple. So even if you get the steel localized, you have converters who can take that steel and convert to those components to meet the quality we need. Because bearings are high precision instruments. We're talking of microns. So it starts with that.
By converter, you mean the machining and the rest.
Everything to convert, to take a steel bar or take a steel rod, make it into a highly engineered product. The ring that we have, if you ever visit a factory, for example, the balls we put into into one of our bearings, the balls are classified. They're 8 microns, 9 microns, 10 microns, and the micron is 1,000th of a millimeter. So that is the difference in the. So you need to have a guy who can make balls consistently 8, 9, and 10, and not mix them up. It's that amount of detail.
And this initiative that you said, first is on the material itself, and then the making more vendors, partners. This has happened 2 years back. This is so.
No, it's an ongoing thing. It's picked up speed a lot more in the last couple of years because we see the volume also increasing here. As India also improves in industrial manufacturing, to your point earlier, we know we cannot gain share and cannot grow unless we have stronger localization. So it's picked up speed a lot more in the last 2 years.
So when you say likes of Tata Steel and all, they are not making that bearing style. Are they alloys or it is your stainless steel?
It's pure steel. No. Tata Steel does not make, which is, I would think, is surprising, considering Timken began as Tata Timken. So I'm not saying they don't make anything. They make some things, but it's very, very small.
And if I were to maybe connect 2 questions and maybe just trying to understand the thinking. When we say we are doing, or maybe perception in the market is that we are not doing enough Capex, is it because the area in which we want to grow is largely vendor dependent? Because not necessarily that we need to do, so in auto, there is a Bajaj Auto which largely follows an assembly model versus somebody else who wants to do everything in-house. So maybe there is a big difference in the philosophy. Is that the reason why our numbers on Capex are not high, and in future also will
high compared to what?
When we so let's say my analyst has put out, we may do a 100 to 150 crore kind of a Capex. Now compared to Timken and other Schaeffler, this is relatively much lower number. And if I look at from our depreciation, which is 60 odd crore,
it's about 300
it's not a
crores
large
for,
number.
300 and 400 crores for Schaeffler in our numbers.
So you have to also understand what Schaeffler does. Schaeffler is a collection of 3 companies.
Yeah.
What used to be FAG bearings is a like-to-like comparison. Schaeffler also is what's it called? ENA and Luke, right? You're really comparing 3 companies with one. So you have to also we mistake Schaeffler for a bearing company. It is not. It's an automotive sub-assembly and sub-components company. So I don't know their bearings Capex numbers. But irrespective of that, the spirit of the question is that do we need to invest more or less? I think we will invest whatever we need to grow in this country. The 150 crore number that I normally talk about, it's not a number that we are tied to. There's nothing preventing us from doing 300, or we could drop to 50. But we have no philosophical debate there. No, we are an insourcing company or outsourcing company. No, we're not like the example you gave me just now. It's purely linked to where the growth opportunities are coming from. So, for example, we have just won a very large order from a very large CV in the country for a very specialized bearing. And we have put up a full line only for that manufacturing in a matter of 5 months. Okay. So it depends where the growth is coming from. But we are not in the business of adding assembly lines in anticipation of growth.
But for sure, you said if we localize more, we will get more business.
Well, it's a little bit of chicken and egg. You can localize more and get more business, or do you get more business and localize? See, the problem is that in automotive, you can make a small bearing, it's about this size, and make 10 million bearings in a year. That's the capacity of a line. You start the line on January 1st, nothing needs to be done with the line. On December 31st, the 10 million bearing gets churned out. It's very good absorption, very good running, very good efficiency, etc. And the industrial, we're talking of 5,000 bearings, 100,000 bearings. So the effort needed to change the channels and make them more flexible is much more. So for sure, if we localize more, it's better for everyone. But we will not localize unless we also have some scale. It doesn't have to be fully occupied. We need to have some scale. We can't be running a line at 10% capacity and saying, in the hope we'll fill up the balance 90% through customers coming in. There's got to be some scale.
So we need to target segment by segment.
Absolutely. This is unlike automotive. Yeah, I mean, this is really a segment by segment game. Because that will also decide where we invest.
Sure. Swati, can you move to rail?
Just on the, yeah, before that, the two-wheeler now, I was reading somewhere you have the content per vehicle hasn't changed despite the EV disruption. Is that the same thing today also?
Well, no, I think the question that I answered earlier on was, will the value change?
Yeah, correct.
The number of bearings might change. The value
no, that's
will,
fine. I'm saying content.
The value,
in
I
the
mean,
value terms.
No.
That continues.
Correct.
Yeah,
and so in EV era, how do we understand ourselves? Because so one thing is very clear to us that value doesn't change, but do we need to do more products which are specialized in nature, and how do we intend to gain market share? What kind of growth that we will get from our parent?
Of course. So EVs need different specifications for bearings. So, for example, EVs need their high-speed bearings, their low noise bearings, their insulated bearings. So, in some cases, even the material might change. You want to replace steel balls with ceramic balls. You may want to reduce your noise, improve your friction, etc., etc. So a lot of things going on. Now we have a 200-member engineering center in Bangalore. Okay, and we have a team dedicated there to developing products for the EV markets for India and abroad. And SKF globally has very strong connections with EV manufacturers, including the largest player of them all. So we have the technology, we have the capability. We are waiting for EV to finally emerge. It's been emerging for a long time, to finally emerge and not keep catching fire.
So as of now, these are largely getting imported.
It's a very small market. It's a very small market. There's a lot of noise about EV, but it's a very small market. You know, we're talking of, I think, less than 2%.
No, that's there. The numbers are
very tight. And today, the EV manufacturers in the country, frankly, do not even need the quality of bearings that we can provide.
Yeah.
They don't.
Sir, in case of hub bearing, is this already coming the base, and how should we think about?
Absolutely. So hub, both in passenger and in commercial, in both segments. Hub is the norm globally, and hub will soon, unlike EV, which will take a long time to get developed, hub is already mainstream. Now it's not 100% fleet coverage, but it's fairly high. So both on passenger and on commercial.
It's already there.
Absolutely.
And we would be again on CV side, we should be enjoying a great market share, but PV anyways, like you said.
PV we don't have a great, so PVs we don't have a great share in any case, hub or non-hub.
Sorry, you want to move to rail?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So in rails, there is this big expectation which has been created, I think, by one of the competitor only, or maybe this is a fact that the government is putting out 90,000 wagon order, and this is rail is an important segment for us. So.
Okay, I don't know.
There was this expectation for K class as well. So if you
sure.
can give us some color on.
So I don't know what item you're referring to, but by wagons you mean freight wagons, I assume?
Yes.
90,000 is for all the wagons, like when they say
Over 3 years.
over 3 years.
Yeah.
So here's the facts, which I think you can read in the papers. It came out 4 or 5 days ago. We have 300,000 freight wagons in the country. Total population of freight wagons in the country is 300,000. Okay. The government has recently announced the total manufacturing capacity in the country is 30,000 wagons. There are people like Titagarh, Texmaco, etc., etc. The government has recently put out a tender for 90,000 freight wagons over a period of time. And now in that, the first contracts were awarded 4 or 5 days ago. So both Titagarh and Texmaco got the contracts for that. But this is not new. This is not new news to anyone, because freight wagons have been the focus of the government for some years now. So it began a few years ago with the dedicated freight corridors. That whole.
We'll have to end it in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
The DFC that was supposed to be set up, or now the current of the 4, they are now finally taking shape. After so much time, and to go back to your K class bearings, the K class bearings are the higher axle, the higher load bearings, which are meant for those wagons running on the DFC. They're double-decker wagons and all that stuff. So I think freight wagons is not a new story. It's an old story. I have to wait and see, but it's been emerging for a long time now. I have to wait and see at what point will this become a reality. When do the DFCs, for example, actually start full operation? Today, the freight wagons run on the same lines as passenger wagons, and they get last priority. Therefore, it's strange to me that in a country like India, of our size, 70% of our freight traffic goes by road. It should be 70% by rail. So if that's the objective, I think it's a great story going forward. But that will only happen when the DFCs go online. You cannot have freight wagons building up that volume on regular tracks that share with passenger wagons. No way.
But if DFC were to take shape in, let's say, next 5 years, or in value term, can we expect our rail business to be significantly better? And I'm not asking for any guidance.
Absolutely.
Well,
rail business also has 4 components. There's freight, there's passenger, there's locomotives, and there's metro. Okay. Now, in that, passenger wagons, I think is kind of, how many more wagons do you add? So let's leave that out. Locomotives also kind of okay. So I would say freight and metro. But between the two, clearly, freight is a big one. But also don't forget, there is also a very large aftermarket in the railways. Although we said passenger wagons will not have any new builds, the amount we run, we will keep having a large aftermarket business. So rail business is driven by freight, I agree with you. It's also driven a lot by the aftermarket business.
and this business, again, like you broadly said, industrial is more profitable business compared to auto. So this should also be forming part of a good margin business.
Absolutely.
Based on that, your program of that rotating equipment performance improvement, what is the kind of revenue expectation that you have in let's say next 3 years?
Our goal is to get about 20% of in the next 3 to 4 years. That's a goal. To get about 6-7%. Our goal
So
is to
that
get it.
itself could have margin.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the other thing which our Dipesh, our analyst, has asked is about the royalty structure. What is the current and how is this going to shape up?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number. I think there's no change in the royalty structure. I think it's 5% or right?
Yeah.
Or is it 5%?
That's right.
There's no change.
That's not
There's no
likely to
change.
change.
There's no change from the past.
And many MNCs we have seen consolidating, especially everybody likes to give that example of Schaeffler. They don't have any unlisted arms. So I think in our past discussion, there was also an openness from SKF to kind of merge this. Is there any
No.
thought process on that? Nothing.
Sorry, I have to interrupt. Yeah, just one. So, sir, but why is absolute clarity about no? I'm just trying to understand.
Because I gave the answer earlier on. The answer I gave earlier on was that the Ahmedabad factory should not be seen as an unlisted entity in India. It should be seen as a source factory for large size bearings that supplies to SKF facilities around the world. It happens to be in India. It could well be in Italy. It could well be in Malaysia. It is not meant for India. It just happens to be located in India. But it doesn't serve the Indian market only. It's a facility set up to make large size bearings for, around the world.
Sure. And one last thing, these structural savings that we have initiated in last 3 or 4 years, which is reflecting in our margin performance, those savings should largely be sustained, right? Is that the way we should think about it?
That would be, I hope so. If I've done my job well, I hope so. If not, then I'm not have a job anymore.
No, I think as far as that listed, unlisted bifurcation which we talked about, the industrial smaller bearings will still come here.
And I keep saying this to everyone
Yeah.
that sometimes we get so caught up in this unlisted entity. It is one factory making only large size bearings, and unlike the Schaeffler case, where those companies are making for India.
So just one last
Yeah,
thing, really last thing,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
on that parents presentation I was seeing, they've talked about these magnetic bearings
Yes.
for the hydrogen. green
Yes,
hydrogen.
yes.
If at all, and it's very, very long thing, but where will it come in listed versus unlisted? Let's say if India also goes for
It again goes back to the size of the bearing.
yeah, so that's what
It again goes back to that. So I don't know where it will come, honestly.
okay.
It depends. Again, if the bearing is as large as this room, even if we want to, we cannot make it in Pune and
But
Bangalore.
theoretically, we will be the listed entity, will be the marketing entity.
Even now it is.
Yeah.
That's what now.
Even now it
Some
is.
part of the value is always captured by the
Ahmedabad
listed
is only it's the factory. It only makes it.
Sure.
It sells to us and we sell it. So we capture a lot of value here.
So all the sales that happens in India comes from the
Distribution.
which comes as a traded revenue, whatever we are selling from that.
Okay, we're going to stop. Sorry.
Sure, sure,
Thank
sure.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
In fact, we haven't seen much margin depletion because of the traded component. That's a big part of
Yeah.
it. Okay, thank
All right,
you.
thanks, bye. Thank you.
You sit in Pune, right? Or
Yes,
Bangalore?
he's in Bangalore.
Okay.
Take care, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Close the recording there.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think there is a recording on the.
Will this stay on all this while? I don't know what they're saying. I think it will stay on.
It will stay on for the entire session?
Yeah, it will stay on. Sir,
Yeah, that's fine.
that's fine. Cool.
I'll just check one second.
Sure, we didn't do anything. We didn't put off. Can we get some cookies or biscuits, something?
Sure.
Something to just yeah, whatever, something to just munch. Fine. I had lunch with you earlier. Hi. Gaurav, hi, how are you? We have met earlier. Have we?
Maybe on a Zoom call at least.
Maybe I think I kind of you look familiar.
Over Zoom, I
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I have stopped carrying business cards, so forgive me. I think they've become very outdated.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Sorry,
Yeah, Gaurav Mishra.
Gaurav Mishra. How come you You hired an uncle.
Huh?
How come you hired an uncle?
We have a couple of more, we have a few more Gauravs
Yeah,
actually.
I figured. That was a prereq to join your company.
So Ankit's been there longer than us.
Oh, okay. So maybe uncle is a prereq. All right.
Thanks so much. We just wanted to, hear an update in terms of outlook and all. It's been very challenging times.
Sure.
Though, I mean, there's hope on the demand side.
Sure.
But just want to hear you on both your verticals, some of the newer maybe areas, rail and the wind and all that, and then just also on the margins and all. You're doing quite a bit, but the parents have been wanting you to become more local and.
Sure. It's been a very, very interesting last couple of years, for across, and you cover so many more sectors. We have barely got out of the COVID issue. Then the whole Mr. Putin woke up after that and caused some more disruption after that. And now there's inflation, commodity, and it's just been the learnings all of us have had in the last 3 years. I hope we never go through it again. But it's been great learning. Our business is, as you know, is industrial and automotive. It's about half. And in that, it's, I'm giving you directional numbers, it's about half OEM and aftermarket. In general, our growth rates have been fairly good. We've been resilient, we've done some structural changes, margins are looking good, and you've seen the numbers already. The big challenge for us going forward is really around, I would say two. One is inflation, which impacts us directly and indirectly. Directly, of course, if demand starts to slow down, it impacts things that people buy, which in turn impacts, of course, someone like us who supplies to those things that people buy. And that's indirect. And direct is just the inflation around raw material and freight. Steel, as you know, is more than half our cost. And steel prices have now seemed to stabilize a little bit, but the last 12 months has been insane. And I've said this very publicly, I think it's opportunistic. But the steel mills, and at some point we need to do something about it. And then freight, and freight both international and domestic. So I think these are the challenges we are grappling. It is not so much, it is less internal challenges, but it's more external challenges. And then how do we kind of figure that out? That I'm giving you a very high level, but I can answer more questions after this.
You just said that you made some structural changes to your organization. Can you elaborate that?
Sure. So, for example, we have focused on I'll give you two examples. We focused on localization a lot more, and localization is not just about making more bearings locally. It's also about sourcing more locally, and for us, we sourcing steel locally. Because unless you localize steel, you cannot localize bearings. And bearing steel is very, very high quality steel. It is not the steel that you use to make cars.
Yeah.
It's very high quality steel. And therefore, even though India is the second largest steel producer in the world, we don't have a lot of steel mills, making bearing steel. So we work very, very hard with steel mills and steel companies to make sure we get good quality bearing steel in the country. So that localization is about steel. Next is localization around components. That steel, the value chain is that steel needs to become a component which then gets assembled into a bearing.
Yeah.
Those component converters have to be extremely technologically savvy and efficient. Bearing dimensions are in microns, not even millimeters, it's microns. The balls that go into a bearing, you cannot put a 10 micron ball into an 8 micron space. There is no tolerance. They're that tightly engineered. And it's not very easy, as you can imagine, to have vendors who can differentiate between 8 and 10 microns. It seems the same, right? So that is ongoing, talking of changes. That's on the sourcing side. On the market side, I'll give you one example on the aftermarket. So aftermarket is margin accretive, and we're looking at increasing our aftermarket business a lot more. We think we have opportunity to grow in the aftermarket business, and that needs a lot more focus. So whether in terms of making sure we have the right product for the aftermarket, making sure we have the right distribution for the aftermarket, or making sure we have the right people in our teams focusing on the aftermarket. So, kind of two examples for you on structural changes.
Just in this context, I mean, you've been undertaking this journey on the REP range. How is it performing so far versus expectation? What does it mean in terms of any incremental growth or margin?
Yeah. So REP is rotating equipment performance. And the whole intent there is to convert Capex to OpEx. So for a customer. So it works really well in some industries. It works really poorly in some industries. Where it works really well is where the cost of failure is much more than the cost of replacement, as you can imagine. So it would not work well in a two-wheeler, because why would you want to know when the bearing will fail? When the bearing does fail, you stop, go to the latest mechanic and change it. But it will work really well in offshore wind turbine. If a bearing fails there, it'll take you 2 months to have someone climb up, get the bearing down, take it back, etc., etc. The cost of failure there is much more in a wind turbine than the cost of replacement, unlike a two-wheeler. So it works very well in those industries. And that's where we are focusing on. So things like steel mills. You can't have a steel mill go down. Have you guys seen a steel mill lately? Ever seen one? Okay. So let me give you an example. Now, steel, think of a bucket as big as this room. Really, think of it as a bucket. It's called a converter. The molten or steel, or the what do you call it? Pig steel,
Slag.
Slag. Thank you. Is poured there. And then you add some additives there, you put some carbon, etc., to give it some properties, and then you pretty much take that bucket and shake it like this. It's called a converter. So you're converting that slag into steel that you can use. Now, how do you think that bucket shakes? And no one's holding it and shaking the bucket, right? And that, I think it's bigger than this room, those buckets are like huge. Now, if that bearing fails, that converter stops working, Tata Steel will have to call SKF and say, oops, my bearing has failed. We'll have to send someone from Jamshedpur if you're lucky, or Calcutta or Bangalore, wherever. The guy will go there, shut down the plant, take the bearing out. And these are not bearings that are made in stock. Okay, we'll order the bearing, it'll come, he'll again install it. Now, meanwhile, 6 days have gone by. Tata Steel will have a loss of 1 crore a day, just on the one converter. They have lost 6 crores. So in theory, I could have sold them an REP contract for 5.99 crores. Okay, in theory, of course, we don't do that. And they would still make money. That's a model of an REP. And that's where it's important to focus REP on industries where, like I said, where the cost of failure is more than the cost of replacement. Steel, cement, wind, and the railways. Now, railways, the cost of failure is a cost of human life. If a train derails, that's a human life lost. So that's where we are focusing on, Gaurav, our REP programs. And that's to give you some context here. The REP programs today are about 5 to 6% for revenue today. Our intent is to get to 20%.
5-6% of company revenue or the replacement?
Company revenue. And intent is to get about 20% in the next 3 to 4 years.
I mean, in terms of the challenges, you mentioned inflation and its impact on the demand as the first challenge. So here, I mean, otherwise the sense is that whether it is auto, where things are emerging from a very low cycle for prolonged cycle, and then in the core industrial itself, things like steel, a lot of capex happening. So I can understand that fear, but just any more color you want to add on both the demand from auto and from the industrial, and then maybe just touch a bit on your sort of new product range for rail and how that's succeeding.
Okay. On automotive, I have to break it down into 4 segments. It's not just one segment. It's two-wheelers, passenger, commercial, and agricultural tractors. All 4 behave very differently. Two-wheeler demand is saturated in the urban centers, and in the rural centers it's fairly high, but that's a lot of it is monsoon and winds. And that demand has been steady for many, many years. Yeah, we see a short-term blip, like these days things are going down, but in general, it is going this way. Even out the ups and downs. I don't see any challenge there.
So if you go to the next vertical, in the two-wheeler space, and it's a big part for you, courtesy the shift towards the EV, how does that play out? Is the value?
Well, if the EV two-wheelers stop catching fire, they will sell more.
Are you positioned there as well?
Yeah, we are. Number one, it's a very, very small part of the market right now. It makes a lot more news than it should. It's less than 2% or even less. The EV space. I mean, it's like minuscule. India makes like 20 lakh two-wheelers a year, approximately.
No,
More.
200.
So 20 million.
20 million.
20 million.
I'm sorry.
20 million.
20 million.
No, but on the incremental market share, probably there's a reasonable part at least. Okay, for the two-wheelers, meaning the scooters, not the
It's a rounding of error. Right?
Yeah.
It's not much. But that's not to say it won't become big. The spirit of the question is that how big will it become? It can become whatever it becomes. We have play in electric vehicles, in two-wheelers, passenger, commercial, public transport, etc. We have a play everywhere. And because we are a global company outside of India, China, for example, 95% of two-wheelers are electric. Okay, and we are a big player in China. Europe, not two-wheelers as much, but commercial vehicles, passenger vehicles are electric, etc. So we have a play there. We have the technology, we have the products. We are waiting for the demand to come.
Content-wise, is there a big?
Well, to keep it simple, the wheels still need bearings. That doesn't change.
Yeah.
On the drivetrain of the engine, the number of bearings will go down, but the type of bearing will change. And these typically become more expensive bearings because you suddenly move to a low noise, high speed, insulated bearings.
Sure.
And these, so for example, you might replace the steel balls with ceramic balls. And these are not ceramics from a teacup. These are very, very high quality ceramic. So the price of those bearings become much more. So content wise, the number of bearings goes down, the value remains by and large the same.
So you're saying basically the product range is there globally, it's accepted within China on two-wheelers or European PVs, and therefore in India, if this were to sort of further accelerate.
And there's no question it will accelerate. It's only a question of absolutely. The adoption of electric vehicles typically follows, at least what's following in India right now is the first of the mark were three-wheelers. So if you go to most towns, I was back in Haridwar. I was there about 2 weeks ago. In Haridwar, all those inside gullies and all that, these are all electric three-wheelers. And that's true in most towns in Northern India. So most three-wheelers have gone to electric. The second is intra-city buses. You see it in Pune a lot. I don't know what's happening in Bombay, but you see a lot of intra-city buses moving to electric. Then two-wheelers, then passenger, and last commercial. Only because of the distance they need to travel. And that's the adoption I think we'll see here also.
Yes.
Was that a question? I can answer it?
Yeah. I mean, it's just that that SKF will participate in that.
Absolutely.
And therefore, there'll be no there'll be loss, but it will be made up.
There's no question of our capability and competency in the electric space.
So are you already present with whatever limited models are there?
All of them. The ones that are making in India.
Yeah.
Okay, many of them are imported.
Yeah, let's say TVS, IQ, or maybe Ola.
Ether,
Yeah.
all these people. Absolutely. But
Next one.
not just these people. They are still very, very small.
Yeah.
It is the Bajaj, the heroes. The right question is, are you in bed with them? The answer is yes. Because we are already in bed with them on their traditional IC engines. So when Bajaj launches a electric two-wheeler, they will naturally partner with someone that they know.
And for some of these ceramic, let's say this high value added bearing which might go in a two-wheeler, you are having domestic manufacturing capability, or
It's too small right now.
it's true. So right now you might be importing, and
It's too small right now. And we have the capability, we have the factories, we have the funds, and we'll set it up.
it is right now traded.
You will need further
But
additional.
right now, by the way, none of the electric vehicles made in India need those high quality bearings. What they need right now are the same bearings they use right now, tweaked slightly, which we can do locally.
Yeah.
But to be truly cutting edge electric vehicles, when they begin,
Next stage.
if Tesla launches here, that's a game changer.
Yeah.
But right now, the Tata Nexon is, it's electric, but it's okay.
Same steel bearing is going.
Yeah, but higher quality steel bearings with some differences. But they don't have ceramic in that right now.
So all the born electric platforms, those are getting launched. Those will have ceramic.
What electric bearing?
I mean, all the Mahindras and Tatas. As of now, this Nexon, they are retrofitted.
As of now, none of them need ceramic bearings.
And then coming to the other verticals in terms of demand, so you touched on the two-wheelers.
Commercial vehicles has been plagued by issues which are even pre-COVID. If you recall, we changed in all our wisdom the axle load norms for commercial vehicles, which I won't, the whole story there. That by itself killed demand for 2 years. Because now if I can legally load the vehicle by 20% more, and the industry grows by 10% a year, I've killed off 2 years demand. So we changed the axle load norms. That I think was whatever it was anyway. So now it's bouncing back slowly, and then COVID happened. All the freight traffic died down. So now you combine that axle load norm change, the freight traffic. So pretty much commercial for 3 years now has been stagnant or worse. Tata Motors is now seeing a pickup in demand. The only silver lining in commercial is the last mile because of e-commerce. So which by the way are mostly electric. Those last mile. So those ACE trucks or whatever they are called, carrying on Amazon packages. The last mile delivery is that's picked up now, but those large trucks, etc., it's I think it's still about a year or two away for pickup in demand. Passenger vehicles is an interesting story. Passenger vehicles are always grow off new model launches. So passenger vehicle demand is linked entirely to how many new models can you launch in. Unlike, let's say, commercial vehicles. People want to go and buy the newest model, and COVID has pretty much killed that demand. For the first time this year, we are seeing a lot more launches. So I think this year we'll see a big pickup there. And tractors, etc., is actually doing quite well. We've had a good monsoon. Both the crops have been very good the last 3 years. So tractors it's a small market, but it's growing nicely.
And in this whole auto category, in the replacement segment, there was a trend that Chinese imports were kind of withering away. Is that continuing, or how's the pressure?
I don't know
there?
what trend these are sound bites that people like to make. I think it's impossible for anyone to claim that we can replace the Chinese supply chain overnight. That supply chain, that quality has been built up over decades. And it's a misnomer to think that Chinese imports are bad quality. Because Chinese make poor quality and world-class quality. You decide what you want to buy. And so, no, I don't see Chinese imports coming down, I see companies de-risking their supply chains by adding one more supplier. That I see happen. But there is no way that you can replace Chinese supply chain anywhere in the world, whether it's the US or Southeast Asia or Japan or India, overnight. No way. It's a journey. Our Atmanirbhar plan, Make in India plan will take time, but I think it's a good start. But it will maybe in 5 years' time, if we have the conversation, we can say yes, it's changed. But right now.
And on the railways part, I mean, so you had a few, I mean, you started from a low market share, and the government seems to be willing to spend quite a bit, etc. DFC, the metros, the Vande Bharat trains. I mean, how are you sort of seeing the traction there for yourselves?
Yeah, so no, we didn't have a low market share. We only had a low market share in freight. We had a fairly high market share in passenger and in locomotives. On freight, yes, and that's changing now because we have now launched localized bearings for the freight market. You mentioned DFC. With the DFC picking up speed now, the new government contracts on freight wagons is also now getting play. So freight will be the next big battle for the railways. Passenger wagons are almost stagnant. It'll be freight and metro.
So these bearings we are making now localized through other entity, SKF. I think. And sir, on the industrial side, if you can touch upon some other industries, verticals.
Sure.
let's say,
Industrial is a whole gamut of industry. So you have a question?
So if we go to industry, just on the railways, there's a new class of bearing, the K class. So how's the acceptance, etc.?
Not yet. K class bearings are meant for high load wagons. We haven't yet seen those high load wagons deployed in the country fully. We're only doing pilots right now and very well accepted there. But the true test is when the DFC gets fully operational. That's when you move to double decker wagons and all that stuff. But so far it's nowhere close to it.
But I'm sure the railways must be testing your product.
Approved.
Okay.
I thought the question was how big is the volume right now? Small right now.
So where the incumbents is where you'll have to gain market share from what you're saying. We'll have to see it as
Incumbents as in
the other global names who are supplying.
not in K class. There's no one supplying K class right now.
Okay.
It's a E class. K class are high unless there's no point putting a K class bearing in a regular freight wagon. It makes no sense. I mean, you can do it, but it makes no sense. Why would you pay more if you don't need it? Because they're meant for high loads. Today's loads, E class will suffice.
But this one DFC Western side double stacking is already started.
It started now. And let's say it started now. We are seeing pilots being run right now, but we got to see it full deployment. Absolutely.
But as of now, initial inquiries and all.
Yeah, okay.
And opportunity size wise, if you can just map it in a way, let's say how.
I don't know the numbers offhand, frankly. I haven't done a lot of research on that. I don't know. All I can say is that actually, I don't know. We have about 300,000 freight wagons in the country right now. Total, running all over the country. The DFCs, the last numbers I read was about 10 to 12% of those wagons would become DFC wagons. So let's say about 40,000 wagons, approximately. And again, I'm just giving you a ballpark number, but you could do some more research on that.
Yes, sir. On the industrial side,
Industrial is a whole lot of industries. Growth for us has been driven by infrastructure-linked industries, so cement, steel, construction equipment, and consumer-facing industries like F&B and textile. And those industries are actually doing quite well. And we're talking of strong double-digit growths in all industries. And I think that growth rate will continue. In fact, if anything, industrial will grow faster than automotive in the years to come.
and that might have been the case for 22 as well.
That's correct.
Of course, unless autos, the cyclical upside is higher.
I'm talking in the long term. I'm not talking of short-term cycle. I'm talking in the long term. If automotive is here, industrial will be here.
Like your parent
Like
mixes.
exactly.
Exactly. So ideally it should be more like 60-40.
70-30 is a global number.
Yeah, 70-30.
And in that context, your attempt to be sourcing more locally, there's a number I have heard, maybe like a 10-15 percentage point more in terms of local made versus what you're trading now. in the
Well,
industry.
automotive is almost 95% localized. Industrial is about 35% localized. Okay. And that's the number we have to increase. Yeah, I mean, whether it's with 35 goes to 45, 50, 60, we don't know. It really depends on demand and where it comes from. But our intent clearly is to improve localization from 35 to as high as possible.
This 35 is including SKF.
So I mean, you incurred the capacity, the capabilities there, the capacities are in place. It's a function of demand for that.
The capability is in place, but not the capacity.
Okay.
So we need to invest
Right.
to build more capacity.
That'll happen through your sister concern.
No.
The SKF technologies will happen in the.
Depends on the bearing.
Mhm.
The SKF technology is not an industrial manufacturing facility. It is only a facility to make large size bearings. We cannot make that converter big bearing or wind bearing in a Pune factory, even if you want to. Likewise, if the demand comes from electrical motors, those small bearings, we can't make it in Ahmedabad. They are very different factories. We make industrial bearings in Pune, in Bangalore, in Ahmedabad, but it depends on the size.
Yeah.
So it depends where the demand comes from. If the demand comes from wind, then we'll have to make it in Ahmedabad. If the demand comes from electric motors, we have to make it in Pune.
And sir, in terms of this transfer pricing thing for the traded goods, during COVID year we have seen first half, some sort of
It was a blip.
repricing,
It was a blip,
which
yeah.
was a blip. But apart from that, there has been no like changes in terms of sourcing, pricing, or
Typically, they go by the transfer pricing guidelines, right? So pretty much more or less, there hasn't been any change around that. So the margins are likely to be in the same range for this.
I mean, is there but is there a range you put like 16%? You of course been a bit hit.
No, again, there is a transfer pricing study that's conducted every year by the company, right? And based on which for all the traded products, and all companies do that. It's not like specific to any industry. It is guided by the global OECD guidelines, and based on which the margins are calculated for the year. And that's how the pricing is done for the traded products.
Sure. No, my question is just at an aggregate for a company level, is there a margin range you suggest or guide?
So generally we do not share, but definitely internally we are driving a margin for the traded products as well, which is generally lower because the risk
Sure.
with respect to traded products are sitting with the manufacturing entity under the transfer pricing norms compared to something which you manufacture locally.
Just one question. So similar, I mean, in COVID, the volumes went down and there was, a protection given to the
That's
entity, if I can say so.
That's right.
On the reverse, if let's say there is a higher growth, so in that case, do you have to forego some margin?
So it is a
Does it
margin.
happen that?
So it is a margin which is calculated based on the comparable companies at a global level, right? So typically the risk, as I said, so if there is a higher profit that you make at a global entity level, then that has to be passed on to the manufacturing company. And if you make a loss, then the manufacturing company will make good for it, right? So that's how the whole transfer pricing arrangement works.
So is there a range? I mean,
So
what
again, it's
kind of
very
margin?
difficult for me to give you a range because that range fluctuates, right? Because based on the transfer pricing study, but I would say it is less than what you make when you're making it locally.
But of course, this is got to do with the traded products. But what you manufacture, I mean, and you've had this huge pressure on the raw material. But you will be passing on some of it. There'll be operating leverage. We are actually seeing operating leverage in recent times, except for this gross margin pressure. So, I mean, isn't it okay to assume that margins will get better than where we are at an aggregate?
Yeah, sure.
That's right. That's right.
Of course.
And
And that's a question not just of transfer, but it's also a question of how much price increases can be passed on. It's more than that. It's more than just, it's about, I mean, how much leverage do we have with customers to pass on the price increases? And how much can we absorb? How much should we absorb? Absolutely.
There's just one question on this transfer pricing. So when, let's say, when does, at what threshold point do you have to forego margins in India and pass on when you are making?
There is no guidance like that.
There's no guidance.
So is it like an annual study that you?
So yeah, it's an annual transfer pricing study, which all companies do whenever they are dealing with a related party transaction. So they will look at comparable companies. What are the margins? Had they gone and sold independently in the market, what is the margin that they need, right? So based on the risk which, say, a manufacturing company is making versus a company which is trading, that's how the margin allocation happens, right? So that's why it's very difficult to give you a number saying that, okay, this is what the margin every time will be, right? Because it will keep on moving. COVID year, a lot of companies made losses, so the margin came down, right? So it all depends on how globally we are doing.
But just on the overall basis, as you know, so that the trend should be upward, but you're not, company will not suggest a level which you would, you know, aspire to be at on a more steady state basis.
No, we will not say.
So on the industrial side, any other new breakthrough product we might have come out with, or any sort of newer industries we might have tried to tap into, or maybe certain areas of market share gain, if you can just help us understand.
I don't think of.
It was like Class K and all might still be some time away.
No, I don't think it's as much about. You know, we are not a shampoo company. We launch a new improved shampoo every quarter. You know, but this is more about how efficiently do we run our operations. There are only so many steel companies in India. You're not having steel mills being set up every next year, right? Now it's a question of what leverage do we have with those, for example, the steel companies. To your point, are we able to increase prices with those companies? Are we able to sell more REP contracts to those companies? Are we able to go deeper into those companies? Are we able to manage their roll shops in a more efficient way? It's all about how do we operate more efficiently with our customers, and that's how we gain share. This is not about industrial companies are not about switching bearings from quarter one to quarter two. They cannot. You know, so there it's all about how do we service them better, how do we improve their efficiency. The example I always give is that when the steel guy wakes up in the morning, you know, his task for the day is how few bearings he can buy today from SKF. When our guy wakes up in the morning, his task is how many more bearings can he sell to the steel company. If we can align those interests together, that's called operating more efficiently. And therefore, that's how we gain share. It is not, of course, it's an important of technology and development, but it's not so much about launching a new shampoo every quarter.
Any area where we might have gained market share, let's say, over the last 1 or 2 years within industry, any particular industry?
I think everywhere. I think in industrial especially, I'm very proud to say that across segments, and part of it is our localization efforts, part of it is the reach of our people. COVID has been a good game changer for us. We have really, and I hate to use the word used COVID, but in a manner of speaking, we have been able to change the way we go to market using, because of COVID disruptions, to actually build that relationship with our customers has allowed us to gain share.
And just on the export side, the wind turbine, is there an aspiration for this export business to become?
We have a philosophical difference with some other companies. We don't set up capacity in India for exports. We will supply locally to companies who will export from India. So all the wind gearbox manufacturers, they export from India, but we are supplying locally to them. Now what they do is their problem. but we are not in the business of exporting bearings directly to other companies or countries unless it's opportunistic. But it's not a strategy.
And this is one area otherwise where you're seeing continue to see good traction,
Where?
the wind box.
Yeah, we are seeing good traction. We are seeing an upgradation from 2 megawatts to 4 megawatts. So we're also seeing movement of manufacturing sites from China, Eastern Europe to India. So we keep seeing that.
And just one thing on the recent year gone by. I mean, any comments on the working capital? It seemed to have.
Yeah, so working capital has the overall net working capital has come down. I think you have realized that. So there is definitely a lot of effort on our side to improve the overall working capital. If you look at our account receivables, I think it is in line with the growth, right? So we've ensured that we collect money from our customers on time. With respect to inventory, what has happened is that there were supply chain constraints, right? So because of which we had to invest on inventory to make sure we reduce lead times for our customers. But now, as we are kind of getting into this year, where there's a lot more focus on inventory to kind of continuously reduce the overall inventory levels for SKF.
All right, good.
Thanks. Just one feedback. I mean, earlier we used to do con calls and all, with the quarterly calls.
Yeah.
I think pre-COVID, I think we have done.
Yeah, because we used to get very junior analysts on the call asking questions that they can read from a P&L balance sheet. We don't need to spend time or CFO and MD being honest on those calls. This is a good conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to be answering questions on you have the numbers in front of you. Do the maths on that. You know, to spend an hour and a half.
But at least once in a year, not.
We do
not
once a year.
quarter.
We do once a year.
But this year.
But also sometimes we use forums like this.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get into a quarterly call where the analyst comes in and he's checking the box, filling up his Excel sheet.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, once in a year with some sort of a qualitative aspect on segments and all.
Like this.
Yeah, no, this
You know,
perfectly fine.
So we do this, we do
Yes, we
with you
thanks
guys, we
for-
do with the Edelweiss, we do a couple of people, we do independently. We're always happy to have a strategic long-term
Yeah.
discussion, but not those conference calls. So that's the reason.
And just one thing on REP, when you said, I mean, idea is obviously to reduce downtime and then save for them, and in that process, we also want a bit more. So is it we do deploy dedicated manforce manpower at the premise of the
No, it depends on the contract.
Okay.
Some contracts, it makes sense for us to do that. In some contracts, we can just double hat our existing salespeople. It depends on the contract.
No, but then we have to, if let's say, have to really reduce the downtime, then obviously we have to have that particular product in the backup and then try to.
No,
have
not
it.
necessarily.
Or we do advise preventive.
So we can have sensors on the bearings, which will then warn, hey, listen, this bearing is nearing end of life. In your next scheduled downtime, which is 2 Sundays from now, order the bearing today.
Yeah.
The bearing comes the next Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, when the factory is shut down.
Correct.
For maintenance, take the bearing out, put the bearing in, and off it.
Just one last question, which is in the marketplace in terms of the competitive dynamics. Is it a steady state situation with the other known competitors? Is it worsening on the margins? Any comments?
Worsening ones compared to them or compared
No, worsening in terms of the competitive intensity from from some new players or the existing players getting more aggressive on
I
pricing.
don't want to give you a philosophical answer, but I think my response to this is, I really think the competition we have is SKF of last year and SKF of the year before that. And it's not a clever answer, really. It's not meant to be that. I really want us to be able to go deep into customers. The earlier question that Ankit asked, to be able to have a better relationship with the customer today than what we had yesterday or day before. That's our competition. I know we invented bearings. I know we are the world leader in bearings. So really, I don't care too much about what other people are doing. I mean, I'm not giving a clever answer, but I really believe in that. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Take care. Take care. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
Now you have taken over.
Yeah, okay.
I'll use a restroom and come back.
Nice meeting you.
Maybe just send a mail.
Sure. So Ashish.Saraf.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll drop you.
Yeah. Do you want any coffee?
No,
I'm reading the cookies side. I just it's coming.
But coffee would be good.
Coffee.
Plain
Plain coffee?
coffee. Plain coffee, sugar.
Sugar sir. Okay. So we have the next meeting with Mr. Mihir Vora.
Mhm.
Max Life. So he will
Sure.
be coming. Right now he's not arrived, but
Sure, no problem.
coffee without sugar.
Yeah. Sugar separate.
Separate. Yes. Ashish, how's it going? I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I'm enjoying. I am also learning in the process.
Come from the other side?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Management has taken a break of
Okay. No problem.
no worries, sir.
The new joining research lab. That's monkey का student.
Yes. किसका स्टूडेंट?
It's a monkey guy.
Taylor monkey guy.
अच्छा मैंने स्टूडेंट है बोले तो
That he has that batch, right? Wellington batch. He selects only 10 guys.
Capital markets.
वो is it?
Yeah, yeah.
अच्छा
And I follow him on LinkedIn
On Twitter. Yeah.
everywhere.
अच्छा
Always a word of caution.
So every year he selects 10 guys. And
Achha.
out of that, 4-5 he places.
10 out of MBA batch.
MBA batch.
अच्छा
And 4-5 he places.
Yeah. Sir, you need any assistance?
मसाला चाय
Masala chai and sir.
nothing thank you thanks Mihir
Sorry, I'm not carrying my card.
you're from SKF.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Manish is just coming.
बॉम्बे में रूम छोटे होते हैं दिल्ली दिल्ली के सारे रूम बड़े होते हैं
This is an old hotel.
Yeah.
This is not a. It's, I haven't seen this hotel for the last 20.
Yeah, I know it. From Bombay only, but I'm saying because I travel to Delhi so often, the contrast is more visible to me.
I would still say the rooms are like this seems to be a very standard size room.
Yeah.
But typically the rooms, because I've stayed in this hotel for quite a number of times, so I know there are bigger rooms also.
Yeah.
But generally you're right. Delhi में तो सब
थोड़ा बड़ा होता है
बड़ा बड़ा.
इतना सुबह भी लैपटॉप डिस्चार्ज हो जाता है
उसको बहुत फटा
तो बैटरी रिप्लेस करवा ले HP is SKF
Pune.
Pune okay. Factory location. Factory location.
So we have factory in 3 locations: Pune, Bangalore, and Haridwar. For the listed entity, we have other factories as well, but they are for unlisted.
Are there different products in the unlisted entity?
Yes. No, the one factory which makes bearing as well, but they make large size bearings, whereas the factories that we have in Pune, Haridwar, and Bangalore, they make smaller size bearings.
Achha. But the railway and all are small. What do you classify as small or big?
No, railways are big.
Ah, that's all.
Railway, wind up.
Railways are doing in the listed entity, right?
No, we are not manufacturing in the listed entity. So all our sales,
Okay.
selling and marketing activity had pretty much happens through the for the entire bearing happens through this entity from the listed entity itself.
But all sales.
All sales.
Achha.
But manufacturing of the bearing, which is large size bearings, happens out of Bangalore.
Oh.
Manish is here.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Here.
I'm here.
Come in. Hello. Thanks. I don't have any business cards. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
I'll stop carrying those. Thanks. Thank you. Hi. 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 Amit, you want to come this side? Sure. Thanks.
Another line. You have a car also. You also have a car. One came back from the same office in 3 different
Well,
vehicles.
that's good carbon footprint for sure. Yeah.
No, because we have meetings till 6, so no point in going back to the office.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
But no, we're just chatting about the marketing and manufacturing structure. So all the sales happens through the static, right? And the manufacturing, you mentioned that the larger bearings are in the Ahmedabad. So it's like some kind of a Maruti kind of arrangement.
No, what?
Maruti has this arrangement for manufacturing and sales. Kind of
No.
okay.
I don't know what Maruti has.
No, so Maruti also has a manufacturing wholly owned subsidiary, which is not part of the listed entity, but they have a well-defined arrangement for cost plus.
Suzuki owns the manufacturing facility. It's not in the part of history.
Okay, I don't know what Maruti wants. That's irrelevant to me.
Huh,
What's more important is why do we have that fact?
right.
Maruti can do whatever they want. It just happens to be in Ahmedabad.
Okay.
It could have been in Italy. It could have been in Malaysia. It could have been in China. Why that's important to say is that our factories are designed by capability, not by location of the, and I mean, you would never have asked a question that how come you have a manufacturing facility in Italy?
Right.
Because you think now because we get asked the question all the time because it happens to be in Ahmedabad in the same geography. But it is a factory set up for a very specific type of bearing. It's a large size bearing, which is as big as a room, sometimes even larger than this.
Oh, okay. Okay.
These are wind turbines. I mean, those bearings when they go on a highway, those are huge
Yeah, you
bearings.
can see them. Yeah.
So even if you wanted to make it in Pune, we could not.
Because
It's different capability.
the
lines.
Yeah, right.
Likewise, if the demand for industrial bearings is coming from electric motors, even if we wanted to make those bearings in Ahmedabad, we could not have. So it's purely set up based on capability. And that factory in Ahmedabad, like I said, Ahmedabad is a placeholder. It could well have been Alaska in Italy with the same starting letter. It supplies bearings to around the world. So it is not to be confused with an SKF India or fully owned or nothing. It's basically a sourcing factory for SKF factories in the world. And it happens to be in Gujarat.
And whatever SKF India wants, it takes from there.
Like SKF Italy would take from there.
Yeah.
Like SKF China would take from there. That's why it's set up there.
Right.
But it has got nothing to do with SKF India.
The issue of transfer pricing, how does that work?
Like, typically, whenever you are sourcing any.
But
anything from
sorry,
any
before
limited
you answer the question,
Yeah.
I just want to clarify to you that of all the industrial bearings that we sell, I don't think more than 20-25% comes from that factory. Good water.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a good water bottle. Maybe even less comes from that factory.
Okay.
The rest comes from either Pune, Bangalore, or other factories around the world.
Okay.
So you got to also understand the
Yeah.
scale here. Sometimes you don't understand that completely. But go ahead.
Yeah, so again, for any transaction that we do, right?
But I assume
it is through a transfer.
Yeah,
through a
I assume
transfer
there's
pricing.
also reference prices for stuff that you sell to other countries.
Sure,
It
sure.
can't be too different from
That's
like,
right.
Absolutely.
That's the approach that we
Absolutely.
follow for the transfer price, like for any related party transaction.
We had changed our related party pricing policy a couple of quarters back because of the server margins that went up, right?
So again, the transfer pricing margins are solely dependent on the comparable companies that we look at every year, right? So there is a transfer pricing study which every company who is doing a related party transaction, they have to do a transfer pricing study. So now depending on how the overall economy is performing or that sector is performing, there will be a set of margins which will be calculated for that year, right? And based on that, that margin will be applied to the transfer pricing transactions, right? So it's not necessarily that last year it was 10%, so this year it will be 10% as well. It could come down to 5%, it could go to 15% as well. So depending on how the industry is performing, right? So that if the industry is performing good, overall margins will be good, and naturally the transfer pricing margins will be good, right? And if the overall industry is not doing so well, the margins will come down.
So the other questions is the meeting of the long time road, maybe the first half of long time. The traded portion of the turnover, how is that classified in sense? Why is it called traded portion?
It's not manufactured.
It's not
by us.
manufactured
Yeah.
by SKF India. So anything which is manufactured by anything which we buy as a finished product from any other sister company of SKF, right, is a traded product from an SKF India standpoint.
Okay, but does it have to be from a sister company or it could be in third party also?
It could be, but most of it is
Most of it,
because
okay.
we're making bearings.
Okay.
Right?
We don't buy any bearings from anyone else.
Okay,
So all that we trade is made by SKF factories around the world.
okay. So, I'm trying to understand the economics of manufacturing versus trading. Your EBITDA margin is reported as a whole, right? So,
Yeah, that's right.
how do you figure out the trading margins versus?
See, typically the way you need to understand margins is that whenever you are buying a traded products in a related party transaction, there is a lot of risk which a manufacturing entity is taking. Whereas when we are manufacturing locally, we are taking a lot of business risk, right? So typically in a transfer pricing arrangement, the margins solely dependent on what kind of risk that you are taking. Now, when you're selling a traded product, the risk which is being taken by SKF India is lower, so naturally the margins will be lower. Whereas when you're locally manufacturing the product, you are taking a bigger risk with respect to market risk and all of that. That's why you make a higher margin typically.
Okay. So SKF India manufactures what types of bearings? All of them are ball bearings, mostly?
No. So now we make bearings. Now ball bearings is one type of a bearing.
Yeah.
Okay, you can also make roller bearings. So I won't get into technicals here. Is that
I'm a mechanical engineer, so it's okay.
I'm not. But so bearings typically, very simply put, have four components. There is the inner ring. I'm being very simple.
Yeah.
Inner ring, outer ring. Between those two, we put either balls or rollers. And the ball basically means it's a spherical ball. Rollers could take different shapes.
Right.
They could be tapered, cylindricals, etc., etc. Needles. Either balls or rollers, and then we put a cage to make sure the balls or rollers stay in place. Simply put, it's these four components. Then you could add some more bells and whistles, but that's not important here. So we do ball bearings with those balls, or we do roller bearings of various types.
Okay. And I mean, broadly, from the analyst report, we can figure out what the automotive versus
It's
industrial
50-50.
also is there. And within automotive, I suppose you must be more towards the larger vehicles, or is it across two-wheelers?
It's two-wheelers about half our business.
Okay, out of automotive.
Of the automotive, two-wheels is about half our business, and the others are passenger, commercial, and tractors.
Okay. Two-wheelers, okay, because I guess the volumes are larger. Value might be.
It's much larger.
Yeah.
You know, we make 20 million dollars a year in this country. We make a fraction of those commercial vehicles. So, absolutely.
And do you sell bazaar also, or it's mostly to OEMs?
No, it's half. In that automotive space, it's half aftermarket and half OEM.
Okay. Interesting. One of my relatives used to be one of the big dealers in SKF.
Really? Where?
In Bombay.
Oh, used to be means he's no longer descriptive.
I mean, I'm sure that, I mean, you would know, I think they're still in the business. Dheeraj Lal Morarji.
I don't know.
I've heard the name, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether they are
Currently, they used to be
But do you guys cover the automotive sector or do you cover industrial sector in terms of your coverage?
I'm the chief industry officer.
Right.
So I look at everything.
Right.
Amit is also a fund manager, so he looks at everything.
Right.
Vishal specializes in industrial.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm just maybe after I want to spend a few minutes talking about what are you guys hearing from industrial companies, because we hear our view, we know what's going on, but you have a much better view of across the sector.
Sure.
So what are you guys hearing, which is apart from the headlines of inflation and commodity and freight? I mean, apart from what we read in the papers.
Yeah.
And but are you seeing? I guess are you seeing private capex picking up?
Vishal, that's what we were discussing the other day.
Yeah. So there are certain components where we are seeing substantial capex, and there are certain aspects where we're seeing some slowdown. So there is significant push from the government side, and we are seeing a lot of traction on the infrastructure side very clearly. Anything that is supported by either multilateral agencies, central government, or central PSUs is seeing very good traction. There's no slowdown of any sort.
That's projects.
Projects as a whole, infrastructure. Yeah. And the real issue lies with the state government. The state government projects are actually way behind schedule, significant cost overruns, and we are seeing cancellations as well in the extreme case. In terms of the private sector capex,
Power sector is a mess.
Power sector.
Nothing happened.
Nothing happened. Yeah. But renewables, of course, still good. But my guess is that not good news for you because solar seems to be doing better. The economy is working out better for solar than wind. Yeah. But the windmill business might get impacted at some point. So solar is really becoming more
bigger.
Yeah.
You don't operate that.
Yeah. So that's one. Hydro, I don't know whether you get exposure to hydro. Mostly.
But in general, you're saying so infrastructure linked capex, but more funding related.
More funding.
But why is state governments not why is lagging behind?
Poor planning. I mean, the issues that were plaguing the states earlier continue to plague them today as well. There's no improvement except a few states in some pockets somewhere they've improved, but more or less they have not improved as much as a whole, as a bunch. Even if you see some of the progressive states, I mean, where we've seen traction. I mean, the Capex that was happening in Uttar Pradesh a few years ago is not happening to that extent.
Road much.
Road is doing very well. Road is doing very well.
Full-fledged on roads. Even Yogi, UP. But that's about it, I guess.
Yeah.
Look, we saw initially there's a lot of capex happening in rural electrification. That has little slowed down.
Yeah.
We saw a huge pickup in PM Awas Yojana.
But is that because it's done?
No, not done.
Funding is still done.
No, so while GST collections are good, but the subsidies are increasing because of inflation. Food, fertilizer, oil, everything is getting squeezed.
Yeah.
So they have to curtail somewhere. So this year, I think, is the first year when even central government capex might start getting curtailed. On the bright side, hopefully with the government getting more and more active on PLI, pharma looks good investment wise, right? Chemicals look good on the. I'm sure at some point in time they'll have to start investing in fertilizer capacity also.
Yeah.
Because now it's becoming more and more important to have self-sufficiency in fertilizers.
What about defense? Are you guys having any view on defense?
Big, good moves. Good moves to indigenize defense.
That's really happening.
Yeah. That's serious about it.
Yeah.
And doing a lot of things. So defense, electronics manufacturing, mobile phones, electronics, textiles.
Right.
So they are rolling out PLIs in all of these segments, and I think they are treating it as open-ended. So whichever sector is coming and demanding,
and is real estate picking up in your view?
Real estate, I think it's picking up in the IT-led cities. So Bangalore, Pune, Hyderabad, those pockets are doing better. Mumbai has also done better, but I don't know whether that's going to sustain. But IT-linked cities have done better.
Because that has a straight domino effect on number of sectors after that.
Yeah.
Cement, steel, etc.
Correct.
Interest rate pricing also does have some effect.
Adverse effect.
Adverse effect,
Yeah.
So in IT, our view is that probably the best of the spike that we saw is over. So while IT companies have good order books for the next 2, 3, 4 quarters, but the rate of growth of that order book is going to slow down. So the order book per se may not slow down, but the rate of growth is definitely slowing down.
Right. Yeah. True. Yeah, we're seeing the same. We're seeing infrastructure, anything linked to infrastructure has been a strong performer for us. So whether it's cement or steel or construction equipment,
Sure.
etc. Also consumer-facing industry, so F&B, textile, etc., is also doing well. Wind, we have to see. Wind has its own challenges, and the railways is in pockets doing well. So freight, we think, will do really well in the next few years to come. The metro is really very small right now. It's not a big business there. Passenger wagons will, new builds are not really happening, but a large aftermarket business. And we sometimes forget how large that business is. It's actually equal to, if not larger than, the new builds business.
Of course, yeah.
Naturally, you can imagine that.
Stock versus flow.
Railways aftermarket is a huge business. But very similar trends we also see.
Is railways continuing its capex spending or slowing down?
Freight, yes. Well, on passenger wagons, well, let me rephrase that. So railways went for, on passenger, they went for this big switch from the old wagons to those new LHP wagons. That is ongoing. Most of it has happened already, but that's a replacement. The new builds are happening in freight. So railways, we really want to, the government wants to see a big push towards freight traffic moving to the railways. So in India, about 70% of our freight movement happens via road, which is not the case in most other countries. It's the reverse, 70% via rail. The problem is that we today share the same tracks for freight and for passenger, which means freight will always take the back seat. Passenger trains will be given priority. The DFCs are supposed to remove that bottleneck, but DFCs have been taking their own exactly taking their own sweet time. We now have kind of, that's a good way to put it. We now have, I think, 2 corridors kind of a little bit operational, the northwest and the northeast.
I thought the Kandla North is pretty much done. A lot of it is done.
It's done. No, it's done. I'm saying operational, like fully operational in terms of, freight moving on the corridors. But that's where I think when that finally kicks off really well, we saw new.
Sorry, how many segments? The full line is on, or
The connection till Mundra is almost done.
okay.
But the connection to JNPT will take another 2 years.
Another 2 years. Okay. So Mundra one is done.
Till the Mundra, the double stacking and DFCC operation is.
So
till
how's the traffic growth? I haven't seen.
So it's slowly building up because you're still till Palampur. So from Palampur, you have to take a separate line to Mundra and separate line to Pipavav. So till there, it's operating perfectly, but it's yet to scale up. Even that section is yet to scale up.
So Bombay one is taking time.
Bombay one is 2 years.
2 more years.
2 more years.
So they say.
So if Shiv Sena doesn't have second thought.
So yeah.
So your industrial, of course, apart from railway and the wind, what kind of industries across the board, like process, more process industries, or
no? It's everything. It's everything. I mean, I mentioned a few. So gearboxes, motors, drives, textile, F&B, cement, steel, chemical, sugar, anything which has any rotating equipment, either in their process or as part of what needs to run the factory. You will always have a bearing in that. The size of the bearing, the value of the bearing, the importance of the bearing is much more if it's in the process. So if you're running a mine, for example, those conveyors, conveyor cannot stop. So you will need to have, and those long idlers on conveyors, they all are bearings. or a converter in a steam mill.
Hmm.
It will need to have a bearing. So the importance of bearings is much more there. The value is much more versus if it's a motor running a plant. It's it's lesser there. But pretty much every factory would have bearings as expected.
Mining can be a big, it should be a,
It is a big one.
yeah, because, and we see activity picking up in
No, mining is big, and mining is actually very large and very large applications also in mining,
Hmm.
because mining and material handling, they both go together.
Correct.
Very, very large.
Interesting. So the growth that we saw last year, FY22, is, I mean, it's still okay in the sense it's probably on lower base.
Yeah, I would not. Yeah, that growth is based on, like you say,
Yes.
it's based on COVID years. Yeah.
So couple of things. One is auto segment hopefully should continue to be less cyclical than the industrial one. But if you were to look at your own kind of trends, does the industrial segment look more robust than before, or
It always has.
compared to all the things that are PLI and all that we talked about?
The last, even if you discount the COVID disruptions, even if you discount all the last 3 or 4 years, industrial growths have been far better than the automotive growths. Certainly true for us, also I think true for the market. And I think that trajectory will continue. Today we are at about 50-50 automotive industrial. Globally, we are at 70-30, 70 being industrial. And I have no question in my mind that over time, now how much time that will be, I don't know, we will gravitate towards that same mix of a 70-30. And we're already seeing that. If you look at our numbers for the last 4 or 5 years, even longer, you will see an industrial business becoming more than automotive business. It's moving by 1 point every year, whatever the numbers might be, but that growth rate is certainly better. And it's good for us because that's certainly a better margin business. Automotive is not a great margin business. And we are seeing that growth happening across sectors, across in industry. There are, of course, cycles and there are, of course, years, but in general, the trend for industrial is far better.
Which is a bit of a puzzle because when you look at the aggregate private sector capex numbers, they don't look that great for the last 4 or 5 years. So what's
Well, industrial is not only linked to private sector capex.
right?
When I say industrial, you look at infra-linked industries. Just look at cement, steel, and construction equipment. The more roads that get built, or the more airports that get built, you will have more consumption of steel, cement, and construction equipment. So it's not necessarily linked to private sector capex, linked to infra-linked capex, wherever it might come from.
Okay. So if and when private sector capex picks up, it can only add to that.
Within auto, your growth is more dependent upon industry growth as per you, or do you think market share gain will lead to the better part of growth?
Automotive OEMs is linked to industry growth because automotive OEMs don't switch bearings every quarter. Of course, they can't. If you're spec'd into a car, that bearing will stay in that car for the life of the car. When a new model gets launched, whenever it happens, then we all bid for new bearings. The automotive growths are driven by to increase market share there, you have to grow in the aftermarket because that's not defined by brand. That's defined by availability, reach, and prices. When a two-wheeler guy, when his bearing fails, he doesn't walk into a mechanic and say, "Give me an escape bearing. This is better. It's making a noise, replace the bearing." And the mechanic, they will whatever bearing he has in his shop that time, he put it there. If he's SKF, good. If he's something else, that will work. So that's where the gains will come from. The automotive aftermarket in the short term, of course, long-term OEMs also, new builds, new models, etc. We have to bid for those projects.
I think with TVS, we were trying to kind of working more increase our share with TVS.
The OEM side, all companies. TVS, you're talking two-wheelers here? Yeah, so TVS is our big, so TVS, Bajaj, Hero, Honda, all these big players.
What will be your market share in two-wheeler space?
Mid-20s.
So it has improved over the last couple of years.
I'm talking OEM,
Okay.
not aftermarket.
I think even aftermarket share has gone up. A couple of years back, it used to
But it's not mid-20s. It is low teens.
In the EV space, is it an opportunity or a threat? The EVization
not a
of
threat at all.
EVization of the auto.
It's not a
Sector.
threat. It's not a threat at all.
But they would, I don't know, do they overall need more or less bearings?
They need less bearings
Okay.
overall.
Right.
But the quality of bearing, the engineering of the bearing, the material of the bearing, all those change. So in EV, for example, you would need high speed, much higher speed, much lower noise, and much better insulation. Because electric. Okay, so on the wheels, nothing changes. You still need 4 wheels in a car and 2 wheels in a two-wheeler. Those bearings remain. On the drivetrain, the engine, etc., the number of bearings will go down because the engineering has changed, but the kind of bearing that will now go into those same spaces will change. So, for example, you may now need to replace the steel balls with ceramic balls.
Or is it already there?
Yeah, very much, very much so. And that ceramic is not ceramic you use for teacups here. It's very, very high quality, of course, as you can imagine.
Right.
And very, very few manufacturers in the world can make that high quality ceramic. So that's one example. And likewise, you will need to get better drainage currents and everything else in those bearings here. So while the number of bearings might go down, the type of bearing, the quality, the engineering goes up significantly, and the price per bearing goes up. So net, it becomes revenue neutral. So
So
this
is it the value per car?
or
Or
two-wheeler,
two-wheeler.
whatever it is, it does not change.
But then there'll be a lesser number of players who can supply these two, right?
Absolutely. In the short term, at least. In
Yeah.
the long term, everyone catches up, of course.
Of course.
In the short term, yes.
Interesting. So globally, how is it trending for SKF?
Well, 95% of two-wheelers in China are electric.
Right.
Here it's like less than 2%.
Correct.
And we are a big player in that business.
In China?
Absolutely.
Okay.
In Europe, there's a huge push towards electrification of both. The two-wheeler market is non-existent there, of passenger and commercial. And we are a big player there.
Your market share in the EV space in Europe is much more than your market share in the non-EV space in Europe.
I would not know for sure. I don't handle Europe, so I don't know for sure.
Okay.
All I know is that we are present with all the large manufacturers. Yeah. And remember, in all these countries, the people who make electric vehicles are not niche players. Take out the Tesla as an example. By and large, they're the legacy players.
Yeah.
And they already have a relationship with SKF. So when Bajaj here, as an example, take an India example, when Bajaj launches an electric two-wheeler, who are they most likely to work with? Someone like us who's already the biggest market share in Bajaj. So just by having, because we have a relationship with them already, as long as we have the technology, there's a higher chance we'll get share of the EV space also, whether it's Europe or India.
Interesting.
Yeah. So not the entire bearing, just
Of
the
course,
balls, just the balls.
Yeah. High speed.
Ceramic, yeah.
High speed, high temperature.
High speed, high temperature, low noise, high insulation. And the reason is obvious, right? Ceramic is non-insulated.
Yeah.
It's obvious.
Your local peers have that technology? Ceramic.
Well, local, I don't know, but globally they would have. Local, I have no insights into what they have and what they don't have.
I mean,
But there is no local.
There's no,
FAG, Timken, they all.
I mean, by local you mean, no, by local you mean local subsidiaries of multinationals
No,
or?
no.
Yeah, NBC. I don't know.
NBC.
Yeah,
What come on,
I don't know.
There's no, is there any unorganized to organized thing here? Not much, right? Most of it is organized, right?
Well, there's counterfeit.
Counterfeit is
Organized, yeah.
But in general, it's mostly branded.
It's mainly organized.
But all these two-wheeler EVs, Ola, Okinawa, you're working with
All of them.
all of them.
So when the vehicles don't catch fire, they typically have bearings in them.
You guys supply to Tesla as well from here.
I cannot comment on that.
Uh,
We are governed by NDAs with most of the large, so we can't comment on specific names.
No worries.
For the portfolio as a whole, how does the raw material pricing get transmitted in general?
It really depends. Well, in an ideal world, it should get transferred fully. Okay. It really depends on a couple of things. How big is the leverage you have with that customer? And second, how is your contract structure? For most automotive contracts, the contracts are structured linked to the steel index.
Okay.
It's a straightforward pass-through.
Okay.
And it's well defined. And that's the way automotive industry works. Steel prices go up by X, goes up by X there, goes down by Y, goes down by Y. So automotive is very well defined, etc. Industrial becomes more
Automotive OEM.
OEMs, of course.
In Bazaar, you can anyway.
That's entirely up to us. Industrial is a bit more non-standardized. So there, unlike in automotive, where it's an automatic, automotive is an automatic pass through or pass down, industrial you have to go customer by customer. And so, okay, this is the increase, let's negotiate. And sometimes you get.
Will they negotiate for existing orders or?
Absolutely. I mean, that depends on the power you have,
Of
right?
course,
I mean, if I have a 1% share with them, they'll say, okay, yeah, good discussion, but get out. Yeah, depends on the leverage you have with customers.
Okay. So there is scope for something.
Absolutely. And much of our margin improvements that you are seeing has come from the pass-through of inflationary trends. Because there's no way we can absorb a 36%, that is steel price, 36%, and that's insane.
Yeah.
You know, a 36% increase in steel prices when steel is 50% of our cost. If we don't pass it on, we won't be sitting here.
Aftermarket will have much higher margin than the.
Of course. Of course.
It's globally, how big is the aftermarket versus the OEM market? I mean, so this mix between OEM and aftermarket, this will keep on moving in favor of aftermarket.
It has to, as in, it's simple mathematics. As and when you have more and more vehicles on the road, okay, you will certainly have a larger aftermarket business. So, as an example, let's take two-wheelers. We make 20 million two-wheelers in a year, ballpark number. If you take the average life of a two-wheeler as 15 years, which means at any point in time, you would have 300 million two-wheelers on the roads. Assuming they come back for a bearing change once every 3 years, right? So you would have 100 million two-wheelers coming back to mechanics every year. And as that number population keeps on increasing, you will have the aftermarket size becoming larger and larger. But more than the market size increasing, it's our share in that market, which we have to chase. When I told you earlier, our share in the aftermarket is low teens as compared to the mid-20s in OEM, that's where the opportunity is. And that's defined by availability and pricing mainly in the automotive aftermarket.
One question on the industrial side. On the railway side, we were about to crack the freight wagon market. So where are we at that stage? Because railways are looking to place a substantial order over the next 3 years.
Yeah. What's that?
No, I don't know.
Somebody left.
Really? Wow. Any business cards?
Maybe.
Yeah, I think.
No, they were there for you guys. Sorry, railways, you're saying what?
So on the we were about to crack the freight wagon business.
Yes.
And Indian Railways is about to order a substantial wagons. With the
Already did last week.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, so, and this will keep coming. I mean, so where are we?
So, railway freight wagons, the tender you're talking about is 90,000 wagons.
Yes,
which came out
90,000.
some time ago.
Yeah.
the total capacity of freight wagons in the country is 30,000 a year.
Right.
And the tender has come out for 90,000 odd wagons. So let's say a 3-year contract.
Yeah.
Now there, the big players, the Tuggers, the Texmacos, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So there we have a play with all those freight wagon manufacturers.
But
It is really no different from automotive. In a way, it's very similar.
Okay, okay. But there was some approval that we were supposed to get from railways.
Got it.
Okay.
For the K-class bearings.
K-class bearings. Okay. And for the E-class bearings?
That's already there.
That's already there. Okay. So K-class bearings. So now there is nothing.
There are no more approvals needed.
Okay.
So that regulatory stuff has been sorted out.
Okay.
Now it's a question of working with customers or with wagon
Sure,
builders to
absolutely.
make sure we get in the
Yeah. That is the regular business. So that
the regulatory stuff sorted out.
is sorted out. So by when was this sorted? By last?
K-class, oh my God, I think it was about, I'm giving you my guess, I could be wrong by a few months, but I think about in the last 9 to 12 months ago. But I could be off by a few months.
Right.
Let's say last year.
Right. And now there are no more approvals required for these freight. And you were already approved for the bearings that are required for passenger wagons as well as for locals.
Yeah.
So that is the regular business that continues to approve you.
You're approved for passenger,
LHP.
E-class in freight,
Okay.
for locomotives and for metro.
And for metro. Okay.
The only thing left in our portfolio was the K-class for the freight. And again, K-class are the high load carrying bearings.
Right.
They're applicable only for the DFC,
Right.
not for regular freight wagons.
Okay. Yeah.
So even the new wagon tender that has come out,
Yeah.
doesn't need K-class.
Doesn't need K-class. So that will have E-class bearings. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair. And the other thing was on exports.
How 90,000 is quite big. Over how many years is this?
3 years.
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
So your railway business should export that next 3 years.
Well, if you get the business, yeah.
Why you'll be there with any of the players, right? More or less.
No, I'm saying it's competitive business, right?
But kuch to mali hai, enough.
Of course. Without saying, yeah, of course. Are you looking for us?
Yes.
Okay.
Done? Time is over?
About 5-6 minutes more. Let us exhaust it.
Not really. It's 20 at 4:10. So
Okay.
Okay, well, we have 1 minute now.
We have 1 minute.
Sorry.
And that's one more question.
You can read that.
So on the export side, I mean, it seems so currently exports is about 9 to 10% for us. So over the next few years, where do you see this growing? And
Hopefully much less.
Much less. Okay.
Exports is not a focus for us.
Okay.
And this is a more philosophical discussion around, unlike other players in the bearing space,
Okay.
we want to focus on the domestic market.
Okay.
We don't have sales teams in export business.
Okay.
Okay. We use exports to fill in our manufacturing lines when we have some slack. So the 9%, I don't even look, it could be 8, could be 7, it could be, but it's more a filler for our lines.
Okay.
It's not a business we want to chase.
In terms of capacities, how do you add? Is it going to be the same locations or any new facilities there?
Well, we have actually enough space in all our factories. If you've come to our Pune campus, I don't know if you've been there, it's a 140 acre plot, of which less than half is built up.
Okay.
And it's like jungle land. There's enough capacity there. Likewise, Bangalore is actually constrained. Bangalore, we have no space. Haridwar, we have enough space, which is not a problem. But we always that's not a constraint. We can always add more capacity elsewhere.
So are you planning any, what's the normal non-maintenance capex typically?
About 150 crores.
Non-maintenance capex. That's going to continue or anything to be accelerated?
Well, at this point, that will continue. But again, depends on how the market picks up.
Yeah.
I think he's giving us the.
Yep.
Let's
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care. Take care. Bye-bye.
Pleasure.
Take care. Take care. Bye. Bye.
Thanks for
Thank you.
Thank you. Will you guys share your contacts? Can we be?
Yeah, just.
I just give you the email ID. Ashish.sraf.
Just a second. Ashish.saraf
At SKF.
SKF. Fair enough. I'll write to you. I'm sure. We don't own SKF currently, but we are in the process.
Well, okay. Well, good luck.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, I think we missed our introduction. So we are the third largest insurance company in India.
Yeah, yeah.
We manage about 1.1 trillion rupees,
Okay,
of which 800,000 is in money markets
okay,
and about 30,000 crores odd is in equities.
okay.
And
So what's a quick question for you? Is are we entering a bear market or not?
not much. Not, I wouldn't call it bear market yet. See, the bear market, I mean, we'll define it as a constant correction, constant decline every day, 3%, 2%, 1% decline for the next 2 years. That is not the scenario. We'll go down. See, because what will happen is, see, the only solution to inflation globally historically has been demand compression. That is what we'll see, and we'll see a big, like a hit on demand, and that is where. So now people came down from 7.8 to 7.6, 7.5, 7.6. We'll go down to 6 all of a sudden, one shot.
Okay.
That is where we'll see the risk.
Okay, take care. He's saying stop talking. I get it. Okay, thanks, thanks.
Thank you.
Last meeting of the day?
Yep.
Great. Okay.
Should we get started?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. So he's sitting there. So that's a
Hello.
Hi, sir.
Hi, how are you?
That's good, sir. Nice to meet you. Hi. Nice to meet you.
just some tea coffee.
No, I'm good, thank you. Actually, I don't mind a cup of tea. This tea was good.
I'm good.
Tea. Solution?
Yeah.
Your colleague also coming? Chirag is coming?
Yeah, yes. Chirag is still start. So we'll start and then we will join. We will make first time. So join. Thank you. So how things are, sir?
Good, good. Surviving.
Surviving. The bearing players are making all the
All the money?
all the money. In terms
So
of
we are
growth.
surviving well in that case.
So that is one segment where there is no
visibility of cost pressure, and I mean, in the last 2 quarters, which what we are seeing,
The cost pressure is there, but I think
the margin.
last quarter we were able to recover
Hmm.
a good amount of cost.
And demand wise, still looks pretty fine, or you see some signs of.
So far, I mean, of course, every industry goes through cycles, but that's a regular ups and downs. Nothing that I can pinpoint to right now that this segment, that there's a trend of a slowdown. I'm not seeing that right now. Yeah,
Chirag,
yeah, sure.
yeah, Chirag. Okay, then I start. So you can join.
You guys stuck somewhere?
Yeah,
Is he in the hotel or is he outside?
just outside. Oh. Okay. So our office is in the other end of the city, so
Where?
it's in the church gate. So
Wow.
91 points.
It's a long way to come from there to there. Wow. Well, why do you have an office there? That's a very.
The SDFC house is there, so I can,
Oh, that's why.
so entire the group, except bank, all the group companies headquarters are there.
Okay. They're very far away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we wait for him?
They will join in 10-15 minutes. So demand wise, you don't see any pressure apart from some cyclically here.
No.
Both autos and industrials.
Mhm.
So you can have tea, coffee, whatever. So we can wait for.
Yeah, no problem. Fine. Yeah, yeah, no worries. Okay. So why do you guys have I just have the phone call and all, right? We should actually.
Because we met in December, so
Yeah.
Chirag has not met, so that's why.
You guys have, you guys are already holding SKF shares?
We are the largest after SKF. We are the second largest.
No, I was actually, before coming here, I was trying to check which are the mutual funds who are holding SKF, and I couldn't see like SDFs. How much percent do you guys hold?
Just call me, okay? Ashish, call me when Chirag comes.
Sure. So you guys hold around 8 to 9%.
Yeah, depending on time, sometimes 0.5% here and there. So we can't go beyond 10% because of the threshold limit.
No, I understand. No, 8 to 9% is a good, but we across various mutual funds, right?
Yeah, across various schemes. So so you joined recently.
No, I've been with SKF for the last, I would say, almost 2 years. But I was basically managing from a finance perspective, I was supporting the industrial business. Now with the Anurag leaving SKF, I have kind of taken on the responsibility.
What's your number? So because we have to.
I'll give you my email ID or you want my number.
Whatever, because post result we used to talk to at least get some sense on.
So you can take my email ID. That would be better. It's ashish.saraf@skf.com.
After this quarter, we were not able to talk.
Yeah, because I just took over
I
the
don't want
role.
to disturb him, so
I just took over the role in May, right? And I think Anurag had left end of February. So this quarter, that's why there was a gap.
So you were looking after industry business.
That's right.
Okay, so you can just throw some light on industry because that is the piece of the puzzle.
So again, industrial business, if you look at SKF, right? I'm sure since you're already holding senior, you must have. But pretty much, if you look at our share, right, between industrial and automotive, we are around 50-50 or slightly industrial is slightly bigger than automotive. But globally, if you look at our industrial share is much larger compared to automotive. Now, as India is growing and there is significant Capex investments being made by the government, and with this scheme and all manufacturing PLI schemes coming in, we are seeing a significant growth across the industrial business compared to the automotive sector. So that's what in terms of if you look at our past results as well. Yeah.
One there, one there.
So our industrial results have, in terms of growth, we've gained market share. We've seen a larger growth in the industrial business compared to the automotive. And we feel that that trend should continue.
Okay. And in terms of industrial offering, so what all
See,
segments
the way you need to look at, right, is that, see, bearing is required in anything that moves, right? So there is an automotive sector which is specifically catering to the automotive industry. And then anything which is outside of automotive, right? Like say, for example, a company might be producing F&B products, right? Or it could be a textile industry, or it could be a cement industry or a steel industry. They all require manufacturing machinery, right? And in the manufacturing machinery, mostly they will need things to move from one place to another, or so for that bearings are required, right? So when we say industrial, pretty much all industries, right, which are into manufacturing would typically require bearings, right? So everything clubbed together, whether it is textiles, automotive, whether it is textiles, steel, cement, railway, wind, right? All of them, wherever there are moving parts, it requires bearing, and that's where the whole industrial definition is.
and when, yeah, that I understood. The second part is how much we are manufacturing in industrial within the company, the listed entity, and how much we are taking from the system is concerned, whether in India or outside.
So again, if you look at ballpark, right, our automotive share, like we know, almost 90 to 95% is manufactured in India.
Okay.
Right? Whereas industrial around 70% is imported and 30% is basically manufactured.
This imported doesn't include the technology, the SKF technology.
So when we say imported, I would say anything which is
Outside India.
outside.
And domestic and the SKF technology, whatever sales happens through this entity, right?
So that is right. So basically for the bearing sales, for the bearing product as such, right? We are the selling and marketing, right? So even if the bearing is getting manufactured in Ahmedabad, it is sold through SKF India, which is the technology entity that you said, right? So that even though that entity is manufacturing, it's still sold through SKF.
And they are mostly into.
So they are, so again, this factory in Ahmedabad is for large size bearings, right?
And any specific technology.
So again, more than specific technology, you need to understand. So typically, the bearing comes in all sizes, right? So a bearing in an Ahmedabad factory could be as big as this one, right? And those kind of bearings are typically required in wind turbines or in railways, right? To be able to take the load capacity of wagons. So predominantly, the bearings which are manufactured in Ahmedabad are large size bearings, right? Which requires a different grade of steel, which require a different level of technology, right? So that's why those bearings are manufactured there. Where smaller size bearings are basically manufactured in Pune, Hyderabad, and
we were expanding capacity as well, I think. Bangalore and some of the facilities.
That's right. So again, we are continuously looking at. So again, you need to understand from an automotive perspective, right? Whenever we expand capacity, we work with our OEM players, right, and understand what their requirements are, what the growth potential is. We develop product along with them, and based on which we expand capacity, right? Whereas in the industrial sector, there are very large assortments, right? So it is not possible to easily expand. We have to understand the volumes, which because we're primarily catering to the Indian market, we should have enough volumes we don't want our channels to remain idle. That's where the focus is always to kind of understanding what the demand is going to be for a particular type, because the assortments are big, the quantities are less. In an automotive bearing, you can make, in two-wheeler bearing, you can make one type of bearing and you can sell 20 million of that, right? So to running a channel is very easy because it's a small size bearing, it runs continuously. So whereas an industrial bearing, the applications are different, right? So because the applications are different, there are different SKUs or multiple SKUs. So you have to continuously change in the channel, right? Like say if a customer requires 5,000 bearing of this, then I have to move, then I'll switch, right? So it takes time. That's where before we invest, we have to understand what the market potential is, because every channel can make a certain size of bearing, right? A channel cannot make all types of bearing because the bearing size vary, right? So we have to look at that, and that's how but definitely the focus is on localization, right? Because it gives us better margins as well.
Localization, when we say localization, then do we have any target of say 70% coming by imported, coming down to say 50?
Again, very difficult to say that we have a target. We are continuously looking at the market, right? And looking at the potential that the market has, right? Like India, if you say compared to China, the potential for the industrial products are relatively much lesser. So it's not easy to make a big investment, and then if that channel is running at a 20% capacity, then your cost of manufacturing will go up significantly, and it will not be viable. So we have to look at that aspect before we say, okay, we can invest, right? But definitely from a business standpoint, wherever we see opportunity, we are making investments. So that's where you see our Capex spend has also gone up from last year. Again, what it would be in the following year is difficult to predict. But one of the things from an organization perspective is that we want to be close to our customers. We want to address the lead times that it takes for a customer to get an industrial bearing, right? And that can only happen when you manufacture locally. So the objective is that, but it has to make business sense.
Any threshold is like say 50 crore is the business visibility, then I can do localization.
It is not, see, you have to understand, it is not like it's very large, 2,000 plus SKUs, right? That we talk in industrial business. So I cannot say, okay, this much I need, then only yes, we have to have a fair comfort that this is the capacity that we can have the spare capacity in the channel, but there has to be a reasonable capacity to absorb a decent amount of fixed cost for a channel before we set that. And then apart from that, the other important aspect is that industrial bearings requires components, which is primarily steel, and not all grades of steel are manufactured in India, right? So we have to localize the component as well. So it is not just that, oh, I go and set up the channel and I can localize. There has to be vendors who are in that situation, who are able to supply that grade of steel, right? So there is, even at the supplier level, we have to fix the component supplies, and then only we can localize.
So in terms of end-to-end localization, you touched upon the right point. So end-to-end localization, how much, whatever we are manufacturing here, just let's talk on that. What will be our end-to-end localization in the component level, steel level, whatever?
I don't have the number. What we have definitely increased our suppliers, right? So like earlier there were 5 to 6 suppliers. Now I think we've increased it by 2 or 3, because there is a lot of engineering work. Right? Not all suppliers can supply the quality of steel. Bearings require very high quality of steel. So not all suppliers can supply that very easily. And a lot of steel, like even big players like Tata Steel and all that, are not making that grade of steel that is required by SKF. So that is a journey. There is a constant effort from an SKF perspective. Given that there have been global supply chain constraints, the lead times have increased. the mandate that we have, we want to localize or make it manufacture locally as much as possible, but it has to make business sense. And we have to fix the entire supply chain, not just go and set up a channel, but there is a long process, right? Like in terms of when you're trying to localize a steel, you need to look at a vendor, you need to validate, then look at the quality of the steel. That vendor goes through a lot of testing and validation by SKF globally, because we cannot compromise on quality. So that's where, especially in the industrial space, it takes time to go.
And different sizes, like you said, there are the various sizes of the bearing, number of SKUs are varying. And say in particular SKUs, if I want to do say spherical, cylindrical or taper and a bigger size bearing, do we require separate capacity or we can do it on the same?
No, it depends. The technology, again, this is more of a technical question. So I am from finance background, so I may not be able to give you a very, very clear answer. But typically, every channel has a size limitation, right? And not every channel is making like all type. So a channel might be making a ball bearing, right? Another channel might be making a spherical bearing or a roller bearing, right? So it all depends on that. So one has to look at what is the overall, what are the kind of bearings that we can make in a particular type of channel versus what is the demand that exists in the market, right? And whether it would keep my channel sufficiently utilized for me to go and set up that channel, right? The other important thing is that our product, 50% of the cost is steel, right? And whether you get steel in India or whether you get it outside India, right? There is no significant cost efficiencies. The cost efficiencies only come in terms of labor, right? When your 50% of the cost is steel, there's not a significant cost benefit that we have of setting a manufacturing facility unless you have large volumes.
The labor arbitrage will be there.
Yeah, labor arbitrage will be there. But it's relatively small. If you look at a channel, mostly it's automated. So it's not that I need hundreds of people to run a channel, right? A channel could run with 5-6 people.
And between say industrial, which are the key segments where you see the growth is happening right now?
Across industrial, I would say the growth is happening across all segments.
Okay.
Right? It's difficult to say that okay, this segment is growing because across India, right? If you look at all sectors in India are relatively growing, right? So that is a knock-on effect on our industrial business as well. But all our businesses are growing.
So industrial last year, how much we have grown?
So last year we had grown around 33%.
Okay. And automotive was
lower. I think it was 28%. Year over year. So industrial is grown by around 35%, and automotive was around 27%.
And out of which, how much will be the cost? I mean, the steel inflation in terms of volume and pricing, because there will be
steel prices have gone up by around 35% in the last 12 months.
Okay.
Right, 35 to 40%. In fact, recently only that's why government put a curve because everybody was just trying to make maximum amount of money that they can. Right? So that has had an impact on our margins. Our material cost, if you look at our financials, have substantially gone up. We've taken a lot of price increase. Yeah.
Let's call up Mitch.
Oh, you're not here.
Yeah, he was on the call, so
we just chatting.
Your hand is up and you carry it extra.
So do you want to clear this?
Which Chirag is here. Yeah.
Oh, this is your meeting after this.
No, this is the last meeting.
So tomorrow is also there, na? Tomorrow's meeting also there, na?
No, no. But generally the event is on 8th and 9th. So today is finishing. उनका वो आ रहे थे आफ्टर टी ठंडा हो गया क्या कैन वी गेट अनदर कप ऑफ टी फॉर हां मसाला चॉप्स
Yeah, so top line में अपना, so it might also be helping the top line, right? So because of the steel inflation, so you may not be completely passing on, but
definitely. Yeah. Top line is we especially in the last quarter we have taken a significant price increase. That's where you see that our profitability in the last quarter increased substantially compared to last quarter, right? So definitely on the top line, if you look at the growth percentages, I mean the base was also low because prior year was a COVID year.
so he has recently joined as CFO. Earlier he was in part of SKF, but he was looking after the industrial business.
You've been, how long have you been?
Couple of years, or little less than 2 years.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
How are you?
Good, man, good.
Sorry, I'm late. That's okay. It was a accident on the expressway. Okay. Did you cause it? No, I didn't. That's fine. Thanks, man. So my apologies for that. So thank you once again. Sure. For meeting us. I think the idea is just to get an update on the business and a lot of moving parts and so on, no pun intended. And how do you see the company navigating that? And obviously the inflationary environment. We were just talking about how you've taken some price increases in the fourth quarter and your margins have recovered nicely. So I think, if you could just comment on the overall sort of demand environment and then how do you see profitability? And that's a good start. And then we can maybe move to new products. Nothing has changed from our side. We continue to be, I think, meaningful shareholders. We've trimmed a little bit of our shareholding, but that's simply because we are finding that the bearing space as a whole, so we also own Schaeffler, we also own Timken, have all become quite expensive. So it's not a commentary. In fact, off the lot, I think SKF is the most reasonably priced. But some marginal change in our shareholding, but otherwise things remain the same.
Okay. So yes, I'll answer your question. If I miss something, just remind me. On demand, we don't see significant compression that we can comment on. There is some. Is that for me or someone else?
That's what you.
There's always some cyclical up and down, but that's true in any environment.
Sure.
I cannot point towards a trend that we are seeing. But we can't be the outlier for too long. There is a long winter coming, pretty much everywhere in the world. But I have no crystal ball to tell you when that will arrive here. All I can say is, as I sit here today, I don't see any compression happening on demand. Inflation continues to be a problem, affecting us directly and indirectly. Indirectly through consumers buying less and therefore people making less and therefore buying less bearings from us, but directly on the steel pricing indexes for us. We are seeing some flattening of those price increase costs now, but we're not seeing any withdrawal of those price increases. And I think they're here to stay for some time at least. So then it's a question of how better do we absorb those price increases, either we pass them on, or we manage our costs better, we optimize whatever we need to do. But that's kind of certainly a concern for us. So Demand, in summary, demand not so much of a concern. Inflation on the steel side, commodity side, certainly a concern for us. So far, we managed that really well, but there's a limit to how much we can pass on versus absorb.
And within the overall demand pie, how are you seeing things? Because at least we would hope that we expect that the industrial side would be picking up a little bit faster. And within auto, of course, there are a lot of different parts because CV is doing well, PV is doing okay, two-wheelers not so well. So, I mean, that's just the overall observation that we have. But if you could maybe just break that up a little bit between aftermarket and the OEM segments and whether it's customer-wise or segment-wise, just to give us
In automotive?
In automotive.
Yeah, so you're right. All that you said is correct. On the aftermarket, well, one thing is, of course, how is the market doing? That's one way to look at it. But more importantly for us, how are we doing in that market?
Yeah.
And are we losing share or gaining share? It doesn't matter if the market is growing at 2% or 8%, but are we growing at more than or less than the market rate? On the OEM side, two-wheeler remains our strong point. And why it's important, even though we are seeing a temporary slowdown here, why it's important is that despite all the buzz you hear around electrification of two-wheelers, it's still a small business right now. But in the next few years, the two-wheeler electrification will be led by the legacy players, and not by the Olas and the, at least that's my opinion, by the Olas, the Okinawas, the Bajaj and the Heroes, etc. So it is important to recognize that that is our strength.
Okay, thank you.
That is our strength. So I'm quite happy with our relationships in the two-wheeler space. Yeah, the short term on this conventional engines will see a drop, but I think we want to be in the space and we're doing well. And more importantly, we are getting into partnerships with all the big legacy players. Because why is two-wheelers so big for us? It is so big for us is because 60 years ago, when we entered India, we partnered very well with those players at the time developing their own two-wheelers, which is why with Bajaj we have such a strong partnership. We are seeing a repeat of that happening now on the electrification side. So that's two-wheelers. Passenger, we are not strong at all. We never have been. And I think we've made a decision, or by default, we can live with it. It's okay. On commercial, again, we are very strong. And on tractors, we remain okay, but it's not a big space for us. That's on the OE side. Aftermarket is where we think we have a lot of potential to grow. We are low teens or high single digits on the aftermarket share. And that's where we want to grow. We are about mid-20s in the OEM space. There is no reason why we can't be mid-20s in the aftermarket space. And the aftermarket market share growth, whatever the market is growing by 8%, 9%, doesn't matter. If you want to double our share, we have to grow at much more than the market growth rate. And that's driven by availability, reach, pricing, product, etc. We're working on all those fronts, and we can talk about that if you need to. That's kind of summary of where we are in the automotive space.
And a little bit of the industrial side, how is that panning out?
Excuse me, water bottles. Industrial, none of the industrial subsegments is more than 8% of our business. So we are fairly well diversified. Something goes down, something comes up, etc. But on the whole, industrials are growing faster than automotive. In one quarter, railways may dip, wind may pick up, motors may dip, and F&B might pick up, etc. But in general, and why that's important is because although industrial automotive mix for us in India is 50-50, globally it's 70-30 in favor of industrial. And over time, we will gravitate towards that mix. And I think it's already happening. Now we are increasing by 1.5 points every year, but over the next whatever time period it takes, we will gravitate towards that mix. And that's important for us because industrial certainly is growing faster. It's a better margin business. We have superior strength there.
It's a better margin business.
Than automotive, of course. Industrial?
Yeah. I thought because of the traded element, the investment business profit.
That's a specific dynamic of what we do here.
Yeah.
In general, like to like, industrials has a better margin business than automotive.
But not in India.
In India also.
In India as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Despite having better products. We should only become better if we localize more. Automotive is a low single digit margin business. Globally.
I thought with the aftermarket put together, because of the difference in the after, I thought the combination put together the industrial business was low profit.
Automotive is a business it's a legacy business for us. That's how we were set up in the country. And we needed to fill the factories to absorb our fixed costs. But industrial is where the growth will come from.
Sure. And I know this question has been asked sort of a lot, the obsession with EV, and I know, as you said, it will take time and it'll start off moving two-wheelers and so on. But as we move along the journey, we obviously want to get sort of incremental feedback from the company in terms of, how you've geared up and, because obviously there's a lot of uncertainty in the beginning, and as time goes by, you will get a great degree of certainty in terms of the road and the content and so on and so forth. So if you'd like to comment a little bit on that in terms of, how disruptive can that be?
EV?
I know all of it will take time. There'll still be a lot of legacy.
Sure.
There'll be a big aftermarket, industrial is there and so on. But
Sure. By disruptive, you mean for us in the bearing space or the market in general?
for you in the bearing space.
Not at all. And I can talk about us here, SKF, and not in general bearings.
Yes.
Our strength in automotive is the wheel end. 80% of what we sell is in the wheel end applications. A two-wheeler will still have two wheels. A four-wheeler will still have four wheels. Those number of bearings don't go down. We are not that strong in the drivetrain, transmission engine, etc., and the number of bearings do go down. But even if we had a strong position there, although the number of bearings will go down, the quality and the type of bearing will change. We will now move from a low speed to a high speed bearing, a high noise to a low noise bearing, to an insulated bearing. So those price per bearings also go up. The revenue per vehicle for bearings, I don't expect it to go down for any bearing manufacturer, including us. Now it depends on who has the technology to be able to make those new engineered products. Because so now, for example, if you need to suddenly replace the steel balls in a bearing with ceramic balls, I mean, who has the sourcing capability? Who has the global connections? Who has the technology to be able to source the ceramic bearings? And this is not ceramic of the teacups. This is very, very high quality ceramic. Do we have tie-ups with suppliers who can make that ceramic? Do we have converters who can take that ceramic and convert to a ball where the dimensions are in microns, not millimeters? Do we have a supplier who can make a 9-micron ball and a 10-micron ball, not just one or two, but 10 million of these? And it can't be 9.5, it has to be 9 microns. So that's what will define. So on electrification. So I don't think it's as disruptive for someone like us, because this is not new for us globally. China has 95% electric two-wheelers. Most of Europe is now moving towards electric passenger vehicles, or at least hybrid. Likewise in the US. And we have the relationships, we know what works there. So we're just waiting for the market in India to pick up speed. And we haven't yet invested in electrification of bearings here, but we will.
What was the China experience been, as you mentioned, it's 95% electric. So how has that been to SKF experience in two-wheelers in China?
Yeah, I don't have specific in China, specifically I don't have in China. I don't know specifically, but all I know is that we have a good market share in China with two-wheelers. And because 95% of that is electric two-wheelers, I have to assume we are fairly strong in that.
Sure.
But I don't have any insights on the China business.
And is it fair to say that because of how things will change a little bit, industrial will pick up a little bit over a period of time, that, 2 years from now or 3 years from now, is it fair to say that profitability will trend upwards because mix will sort of improve?
You don't have to go 2 years out. You can compare the last 2 years. You can even look at history.
Yeah.
Look at looking in the future. And it is trending. And that uptrend will keep going. Whether the slope of the uptrend becomes sharper or not, that depends on how fast we grow. But that's already happened.
And that's driven by mix.
And so you pointed out around 80% of the bearing from the region side. So engine, if I'm not wrong, so engine, your bearing are mostly engine agnostics.
I'm sorry, say it again, sorry.
So the engine side, I mean, like say Safran have a lot of engine bearings with the needle roller and all things. But you guys don't do all those kind of
We
things.
do. We cannot. When I said 80% of our business is wheel ends, 20% is the engine. So we do.
Okay.
So we're not zero in that.
Mhm.
But that's not our bread and butter business.
And we have been in past talking a lot about the we have three and all these things, but now you're saying that we are kind of given up on the passenger side. So how should we?
No. I didn't say that. I said it's not a focus for us. We are okay, but I said, yeah, no, I don't use the word given up. I said we can live with it. Well, live with it means that we have a share in the PV business and we can live with it. Our intent is not to grow that business.
Okay, got it. And so last year, industrial for everybody has grown like anything. I mean, somebody has, I mean, most the two other MNC guys have talked about 100% growth in wind side, and most of them have doubled the wind business. So what is our growth driver in the wind? I mean, like overall industrial.
Well, I don't know what they've grown. I don't want to comment on that, but you have to understand that. First of all, you have to also understand a few things, and I think it's important for you to also dissect numbers that you see. What is called industrial in Schaeffler may be different from what we call industrial, and that I'll let you figure out. Show the differences. That's one. Second is Schaeffler is more than just bearings.
Yeah.
It's a number of things. So I need to figure that difference out. But leave that aside. I'll just comment on SKF and wind, if that's okay. Now, wind is about 7% of our industrial business. Okay, it's not a big business, and we are partners of choice, suppliers of choice to all gearbox manufacturers, and that's kind of where our strength is. And I don't know if we double the business. I don't know if we double the business, but it's growing nicely.
Okay. Because both the guys have commented that they have doubled the business last year.
Good for them.
And in the aftermarket, industrial aftermarket side, so you have last time when we met, you said that there is I think spurious part.
It's 7% of our total business, so about 14% for the industrial business.
Correct.
Yeah, to clarify.
And railway will be another 7%.
Similar.
Yeah. And in the aftermarket, industrial aftermarket, when we last time met, you said around 30% penetration of the bearing players are there in the industrial aftermarket or overall aftermarket, but 50-60% is spurious parts in that segment. So is it industrial or is it?
I don't know if I've made that comment specifically. What I may have said is 1 in 4 bearings sold in the country are counterfeit bearings, which is true in general, automotive or industrial.
Okay.
And I don't think that's going to change ever.
Okay.
That's just the market, the way the market is. Well, the comment I may have made is that in industrial, people do not know they're buying counterfeit bearings.
Okay.
They think they're buying genuine SKF bearings. And in many cases, they're paying a higher price because they think they're buying SKF at a premium. In automotive, they know they're buying counterfeit and they're paying a lower price. But in industrial, people will not take the chance.
But this 1 in 4, will it be true in industrial as well?
Yes.
Isn't it harder to come with a spurious product in industrial than it is in auto, or is not?
A spurious product is spurious product. No one is checking the dimensional accuracy for bearing. When you need a bearing and you go out and you call and you can't find SKF or Schaeffler or Timken, you will call your friend.
Aren't there any leapfrogs in technology to stem this? Because we've been shareholders for a long time, and this issue of spurious bearings has also been for a long time. And this there's raids and so on and so forth. These things have, and your
Raids is not
packaging changes, and the
none of that
spurious
is-
guys become.
These are all band-aids.
Exactly.
Okay, it has to start with education. So how do you? Well, that's wrong phrase. Let me give you an example. We have a large F&B player, a large multinational F&B player, whose name you can guess, in North India. They make dairy products. They have a factory in North India, somewhere in Punjab, where they had to, their bearing failed on one of the lines, and they wanted to get a bearing immediately. For some reason, the local SKF distributor there did not have the bearing in stock. So the purchasing guy in the factory called his mama or chacha or somewhere, I need a bearing desperately. And he goes, yeah, I have a bearing. It's SKF. But I need to get it from somewhere else, and so you need to pay a premium for it. The guy said yes. And they paid a 45% premium to get that bearing. They bought a genuine SKF bearing at a 45% premium, and they put it in the line. It worked for 4 days. Then they're scrambling. And then they call us. What is wrong with you guys? Use SKF bearing, it's failed in 4 days, this is bad quality. We said, really? That's crazy, but shouldn't happen. So we send an engineer to the factory. We take the bearing out and we show them. This is not SKF. So the point is that people are forced to buy what they think are genuine SKF bearings. They don't know they're not buying counterfeit bearings. Unlike a Louis Vuitton bag where you know it's a counterfeit bag.
Yeah.
Here they are buying genuine SKF bearings. And as long as that's our failure, that we did not have a bearing in stock at the time. Therefore, in a way, the guy was forced to go and buy something else. So it's all about how do we ensure bearings are available where they need to be used at the right time. It's not a pricing issue.
There's no change. I'm just surprised with all the change in technology and the ability to sort of individually mark out items digitally and so on and so forth. There is no big change on the anvil which will change this. It's a slow burn. You're constantly.
But you have to understand, they are assuming they don't know 1 in 4 is counterfeit. You and I know this.
But there's no way to check with new technology that once I buy a product and I scan it and I can figure out that this product.
Why will they even do that?
Because you just assume.
They don't know. You and I know 1 in 4 is counterfeit. That purchasing guy in that factory in Punjab, he did not know that. He just, if someone tells him you have a SKF, looks SKF, look packaging, why would he think it's counterfeit?
Yeah.
And when you go buy a Coke bottle from a store, you don't scan the code to see if it's counterfeit or not, right? You assume it's genuine.
Yeah.
Because you don't know. Now, Coke might know 1 in 4 Coke bottles is counterfeit. But you don't know that. You're not checking every Coke bottle. Same way here. So therefore, the education becomes important. But even more important becomes making sure that we have availability of genuine Coke bottles where you are drinking Coke.
Yeah.
And genuine bearings where the purchasing guy needs it. That becomes important.
And to that point, how fast, because distribution has expanded year on year for many, many, many years. And you would assume that now low hanging fruit, all kinds of hanging fruit have been plucked. So now incrementally, I'm assuming there is not much left. So is that a fair comment?
No, it's not. Our distribution coverage, and we have the best coverage in the country, is about 10,000 pin codes out of about 20,000 pin codes in the country. Okay. There are still half the country which does not have a distribution coverage of SKF. Now you could argue there's some really obscure villages somewhere, of course, given all that. But there's still a lot more that needs to happen. So one is improving coverage across the country. But more importantly, even in those 10,000 high frequency usage of bearings, how do we prevent stockouts? So it's a whole, and that's ongoing. So, it's a slow burn, yeah, it will take time, but that's something that we need to do every day. It won't happen overnight.
Do we need to digitize the entire supply chain so that?
Sure. Yeah, we need to digitize. We need to have e-delivery. So, for example, we launched an e-shop January 1st last year with a committed delivery time of 48 hours. So, wherever you are in the country, even in those balanced 10,000 pin codes we don't service, if you go online and place an order, you have two things going for you. You will get a genuine SKF bearing, you'll get it within 2 days or 48 hours.
And one thing I was just asking before, I mean, within say specific size of bearing, so whether it's like say 8-inch, 12-inch, or 16-inch, can on a same channel or same line, can we make taper, cylindrical, cylindrical?
No, size is different from the type.
Okay.
You confuse 6, 12 inches you mentioned, and then you mentioned cylindrical taper, etc. One is size and one is type.
Yeah.
Let's unpack the two. The channels or lines are set up by sizes, not by type. So in the same size range, we can set up ball bearings, taper, roller, etc. No, not a problem.
Okay.
The problem comes in the channel, in the size. Now, if you've seen a factory, there are conveyor belts. Now, these are channels that run like this. It's like maybe this big. So in this big, you can make a bearing which is this size, or this size, or this size, or this size. You can't make this size, obviously. So there is some flexibility within the size of the bearing. But you cannot make a wind bearing, which is like bigger than this room, on a motor bearing line.
But types we can change.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that simple, but it can be done.
And apart from say railway and wind, which are the other segments which are firing in industrial? Because now every year we are talking about 1.5% increase. So
Yeah, but I would not say railway and wind are firing.
Okay.
They're doing well. I think what's firing for us are the infrastructure segments. So cement, steel, construction equipment, mining, material handling. That's firing for us.
Okay.
Because we are seeing a lot of capex in those segments. You know, railways is not seeing a lot of capex so far. We're only hearing about freight. I mean, wind, we are not seeing that great developments. We are not. The big segments are, like I mentioned, these 4 or 5 segments. And we've had no slowdown there in the last 2.5, 3 years.
Steel, cement.
But steel, cement, construction equipment, mining, material. Let's take these 5 segments.
And what about just moving that a little bit in terms of the export opportunity? Is that also seen as a sort of a status quo business? You know, you also now, I believe, have a regional sort of responsibility. So does that change things in any way? And the fact that China has gone through its own supply chain issues, was China a big supplier outside of China? And is this just going to be a business which is, I wouldn't say a filler business, but is this a concerted big opportunity, or is it, you know, sort of
philosophically, SKF has always believed in being local, and we may have a different philosophy compared to other companies. That's okay. So it is truly a filler business. If we don't have sales teams out there scouting for new business, no. If someone in Brazil wants some bearings and we have some spare capacity, so we make figure and ship it, and then you sell to your customers. So we don't sell to any customer from it. We will support an SKF factory in Brazil or an SKF factory in Italy. Okay, we can make, we sell to you, and you do what you want with it. The only thing I'll say is that, talk of my regional role, on industrial, if we need to localize more, we need to have scale. Unlike an automotive factory or automotive manufacturing line, which can churn out 10 million bearings a year of the same type, industrial sizes are 5,000 bearings, 10,000 bearings, 100,000 bearings. So there we cannot put up a line unless we have scale. So then we would say, okay, let's look at the demand in Australia, Malaysia, etc., Indonesia, India. And if that scale means setting up a factory in India or China or not China, Malaysia or someplace, we will do that. But that's again a manufacturing decision. It's not an export sales decision.
In auto aftermarket, are we growing?
We are growing big time.
Okay.
We have a low share there. We need to increase share there.
Mm.
And we have now just launched the last 6 to 8 months a brand new distribution model, really based on FMCG model.
Okay.
Because till now it was a distributor-led model.
Mm.
We sell distributors and they would do whatever they want with it.
Mm.
That we figured that's not going to work for us. We need to take control of our channel.
Mm.
So now we have, similarly, we have sales guys, we have journey cycles, we have, typical FMCG model, experimenting.
The kind of pricing premium you still enjoy in the market with the Zapla, etc. Is it also prohibitive in terms of market share? Do you see that? Or?
That is, yeah, sure. That's a call we need to make all the time. Where is the balance there between, of course, you can drop prices by 10% and maybe gain 8% market share. Or you can increase prices by 10% and lose, but that's a balance you make all the time. But certainly, we don't want to be the bottom feeder that we are, because that's a race to the bottom. They'll keep dropping prices. At some point, other people will catch up with you. Then we'll do that. That's a race to the bottom. So we are happy with the way we are.
And here you said you have single-digit market share with the aspiration to
In automotive aftermarket, yeah,
with the aspiration to double that over a period.
at least. Because that's one business where we have the lowest market share amongst all our segments. Typically, we are late teens or early 20s in most of our segments.
What is the, just if you could remind me, I know a very rudimentary question, but within auto, what is the contribution of aftermarket?
Half.
And within industrial?
Same. I'm giving you directional numbers, plus minus 5%.
And the aftermarket profitability in industrial and auto would be similar or would be much higher in industrial?
It would be.
So is the waterfall industrial aftermarket, industrial OEM, auto aftermarket?
It would be industrial aftermarket, automotive aftermarket, industrial OEM, automotive.
When we talk about industrial OEMs, so who are these OEMs? Typically the LNTs or the capital good manufacturer? Or
it is.
So
let's take an industry example to bring it home. Let's take Tata Steel as an example. When Tata Steel sets up a new production line, they will be working with manufacturers who supply to them these lines. People like F.L. Schmidt, John Cockerell, etc., etc. So we would work with those people. So when they supply a new smelting line to Tata Steel, they'll be making it wherever they make it, you would work with them. And then you would work with Tata Steel on their aftermarket business. So once it is installed, and then who will maintain that? What happens when it needs to come back for maintenance or when it fails? Even that needs hand-holding. So for the OEMs, we would work with their suppliers. For the maintenance, we would work directly with them.
So once it's operational, then it's like consumables every quarterly, monthly, will be supplied to their purchases.
Yeah, I mean, in a manner of speaking, yes, it's a little more complicated than that. A consumable means it's consumed on a regular basis, but these are bearings that sometimes cannot afford to fail. If it fails, it will cause loss of crores a day. So it's not like oil. Use the oil and put the like. Can't fail.
Any thoughts on, say, lubrication and all these businesses?
What thoughts?
So kind of growth, because like
that's not part of the SKF India business.
Are we planning anything on that?
We have a lubrication business, but that's not part of the SKF India business. Not part of the different company completely.
Okay, so even sales doesn't happen through this sector. Okay.
So this is a bearings company.
Any comment on the competitive landscape? If anything has changed, whether it's segment-wise or any other sort of observation that you would have, that you're seeing people less aggressive, more aggressive, gaining share, new product introductions, however you'd like to define it.
Maybe I made this comment last time, I don't remember to you. Competition in the bearing space falls in 3 or 4 categories. One is the large global multinationals, and that's basically 3 of us, Schaeffler, Timken, and SKF. And we have our strengths, we have our weaknesses in various segments, and you know all the details. Then there are the local, regional competitors, so not global. There could be Chinese companies or Japanese companies or Korean companies who are basically attached to OEMs in their home countries and who move with them. The reason we can live with a poor share in the PV space is because most PV manufacturers in the country, at least the large ones, have a Japanese or Korean affiliation. So I don't want to waste my time and effort working with Suzuki in Japan or Hyundai in Korea. It's not worth my time right now. So we let that be. Then there are the local competitors, in our case in India, whom we respect a lot. People like NBC, etc. They do a fine job. They make good products, etc. And then they're expanding overseas. And the last one is the counterfeit products, which is also competition for us. We talked about that already. In terms of what has changed, I think what has changed is that those regional competitors, those Chinese, Korean, Japanese competitors, are really having a tough time, and nothing to do with the local issues with geopolitics and freight, etc. In general, we don't see them being able to scale up
outside of their established relationship.
It was okay for them to come into India when Hyundai was expanding. Okay, and Maruti is expanding. But beyond that expansion, so they had tremendous growth rates as riding that wave of expansion. And then we all think, oh my God, what's happening here? We're losing share, etc., etc. But now when Hyundai is kind of wherever they are, or like Kia now is expanding, so they have a good share there. But they're not able to excuse me, go beyond that. And they've tried really hard. They're not able to. Why, I don't know, honestly. I'm a theory on that. That's one thing that has changed. On the other hand, Indian manufacturers, I have, like I said, great respect for NBCs of the world. They're expanding beyond India. In contrast, they're really able to expand well into some specific segments, specific countries outside India, and doing a fine job there. That's what has changed.
A slightly different question. We are invested in a supplier of yours, and just wanted to understand
Rolex.
So I suppose you get this question quite a bit. The fact that you
actually no.
So we are not a very large shareholder. We're a small shareholder, but we're scaling up. So just curious about how you would think about them, and more curious about any weaknesses, because I think the good stuff everybody's happy to talk about. But if you have anything that you feel that they could, they're not so good at, and just,
I cannot comment on that
at all. But even forget the weaknesses, but in general, as a good company,
well, they're a supplier to us, so must be good.
Sure.
Otherwise, they won't be supplying to us.
And not on Hasta, because that is another company coming.
Same answer. They supply to us.
Are they? Okay, let me ask it differently. I won't give up so easily.
Sure.
What share do they have with you?
Can't answer that.
Okay. Okay, that hamstrings right. To go further. Fair enough.
And you understand why? I don't want to comment on the third party. That's information that we share with them. I cannot comment on their share with us or their weaknesses or strengths, etc. That's between us and them.
Who's the? Is it possible to comment who's the other besides them? Is it a sort of duopoly? Is it sort of 2 or 3 suppliers?
There are multiple suppliers. It's not a duopoly for sure. There are multiple suppliers.
And again, I'll just push a little bit and feel free to shut me down immediately. But,
Sure.
Is there a desire over a period of time to consolidate in this category the number of suppliers, or you're happy to have 4, 5, 6?
I don't want to comment specifically on Rolex.
I'm not sure, not specifically on Rolex.
In general, I think it's a tough one to answer, honestly. And I'll give you my in some components we would like to consolidate. Simply because we need a certain scale for them to be able to invest.
Yeah.
If if technology changes very rapidly, let's take an example in the future. Ceramic balls, we spoke about that. I don't want to have 10 ceramic ball suppliers. I would rather have one is too little, maybe I would have two. Because that is so specific. It is so capex intensive. We need to have large 2 or 3 players who partner with us, make the right investments in technology and manufacturing to be able to meet our requirements. Okay, but in others, we are okay with a larger base. As long as they have reasonable scale, reasonable investments, we are okay with that.
And between Harsha and Rolex, which one you would like you regard more?
Both.
I think I could have answered that.
True. But here's what I will tell you, and this is public information. Harsha supplies to more than SKF. So Harsha supplies to many SKF entities across the world. Rolex right now, I think, is only, but that's not a function on the competence, it's a function on the reach and the network and how long they've been in the business.
So the infra segment you said was really fighting for you. So what has been the growth rate out there?
And I don't know exactly often, but ballpark, I think it would be late teens, early 20s, ballpark that range. Certainly more than other segments. So we're not going. I think it would be, I don't know, mid teens, early. I mean, yeah.
It will be higher because the industrial growth last year was around 35% or something.
Well, no, I don't want to compare that's a very bad comparison for obvious reasons.
Okay.
I'm just saying steady state business.
Okay.
Don't compare to COVID rates and all that. So internally, for example, we look at 2019 growth rates. We ignore 20 or even 21. When I reduce, I'll actually show me 2022 over 2019. Okay, that's a good comparison. So I would say steady state, 3-year CAGR in that region.
Just going back a little bit in terms of raw material increases and the pass on thereof, is that considering how prices have moved up, is that more or less done? Because now pretty much most commodities, except for probably energy, have leveled off, and to some extent steel has come down. So does that mean the
Will come down for us for sure. Steel.
not at all? After the government,
Not yet. We're talking with them, but not yet. But go ahead.
so does that mean that you've passed on pretty much everything that you needed to? Is it now incremental new movement in prices that you have to pass on, or even
No, I think we still have scope to pass on more increases. And I think it's an ongoing thing. We may have passed on maybe 60-70% of our, maybe more actually. And I'm giving you a ballpark number here. But I think there's still scope to pass on more. We obviously can't pass on the full 100%. That'll never happen. But there's still some scope to pass on.
So if you pass on 70, 80 and you can't get to 100, there's another 5-10% which you can possibly.
I think there is, and I think it also varies by customer.
And customers, I'm assuming it's because it's an inflationary environment, are receptive. This is not an unusual request. Everybody's asking.
Because they're the same to their customers.
Exactly.
Okay. Now it's a question of negotiation back and forth. It depends how much pricing power you have.
Sure.
It depends on that. But in general, customers are receptive. I would agree with that.
Sure. And just a slightly long-term question. If you look at it sort of 5-6 years, if not longer, where can this profitability, which is sort of 15-16%, where can that be sort of 5 years from now, depending on how possibly mix changes? And I assume that's the big driver. Where can that be sort of couple of 4-5 years from now? And
well, it really, let's assume, for the sake of this discussion, that industrial is early 20s profit margin and automotive is high single digit. Okay, and therefore the mean is whatever number you give, 61%, right? Now it's only a question of, as that mix changes, how fast that mix changes. If industrial today is 50%, that becomes 70%. Automotive becomes 30%. You can do the maths on that.
What is, I could get, there's a point of time when we did this for SKF globally, we've not done it recently. But the profit, the margin there is globally is far lower than what you would find in India, right? So the reason I asked that, I mean, for 5 years from now, we'll still be very far from where developed markets are. But that market has obviously gone to a much lower margin level despite having much more industrial. So does that mean, I mean, for 20 years data, I'm not sure whether we'll get there, but why is it that Indian profitability is so much higher than what you see outside of India?
Forget their cost levels. Forget them.
Is the gross margin comparable?
I haven't done the research, but I would think it would be.
So it's really the employee cost and the energy and all of that stuff.
I don't know the exact number, but I would have to assume it is. The GMs would be comparable. It is that SGN. I mean, you pay an employee in Stockholm. You know?
Yeah, fair enough. That part I didn't know whether the gross margins are comparable. And longer term, over a 5-6 year period, you know, every year growth is going to vary, and we've particularly seen it in the last 4 or 5 years that we've had sort of very all over the place growth because of the environment, nothing else. But is it fair to say that if we get back to a normalized GDP growth of 6-7% in real terms and another 5-6% in nominal terms, that's GDP of 12, and you should typically grow sort of 3-4-5% more than that because you'll gain share, you'll have the industrial piece should grow a little bit faster, and you'll obviously there'll be other stuff which will sort of help out. So is that a fair, is a 15-16% growth number over a 5-year period, is that something which is, you think, would you comment on the higher side or the lower side or something which is accurate?
I would actually say it's on the lower side. I would say that we're looking at, and that's a fair number, you know, and that's a bare minimum we need to get. And I can talk, SKF globally has made a statement, they want to double their business by 2030. Okay? And therefore, they're looking at an 8% CAGR.
Globally.
I'm talking SKF.
Yeah.
I'll compare that, come back to India in a second. So they're looking at an 8% CAGR between now and 2030. Okay. Now, I have to assume at the bare minimum, we have to be double that. Yeah. Just given the way we are. So that's the bar right now of 16% CAGR. And so that's the lowest number we need to hit. Most likely will be above that.
Sure, and the boosters will come from gaining. A lot of the booster will come from, because it's not going to come from the export pieces, is like I said, a filler. The aftermarket seems to be an area, both industrial and auto, where you can turbocharge the growth, and the balance will depend on the market.
The growth will come from industrial, OEM, and I think automotive aftermarket. Industrial aftermarket, we are fairly well penetrated. Now it's a question of, it's a slow burn. We'll get there.
So the industrial aftermarket share is similar to the OEM share?
Yeah.
It's only in auto that there's a big difference.
And industrial aftermarket pretty much follows industrial only. Because once that line gets set in Tata Steel, we're already there. We know where it goes, right? Because we know what to do there. Now, in automotive, we don't know where the two-wheeler gets sold. So we're not there. That's the difference.
Yeah. Working capital or
Capex, I mean, last year we have been ramping up. So what kind of Capex we are looking for?
We look about 150 crores odd every year, and that kind of broadly non-maintenance Capex, that kind of thing.
At what point do you have to do a greenfield?
I don't know the exact number, but anecdotally, not for the next 5-6 years. Simply because we have enough and more land available around in the factories. And the Pune factory is 140 crores, 140 acres.
Wow.
Of that, 70 acres to forest land.
Despite growing at bare minimum stages.
Yeah, I'm telling you, 70 acres land in Pune factory is, they're like snakes roaming around there and sandalwood trees. Yes. We actually had to put an electric fence around the Pune factory because we used to get sandalwood smugglers coming in. Uncut sandalwood. It's an premises there.
That's a large, 30-40 acres of forest is huge.
It's huge. Now think about the foresight of someone who bought that land in early 60s.
Yeah.
It's not in the middle of Pune. It's worth a lot of money. By the way.
Last time we went there.
You were there, exactly. I came there. All right, wrap up here.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Nice, guys.
Great. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Any change you see in terms of working capital cycle? Nothing.
No change. Again, there is a lot more focus on inventory, right? If you look at our account receivables are pretty much grown in line with our overall growth. But given that there were supply chain constraints, we last year intentionally increased our inventory levels to make sure we are meeting our customer needs. So now we are focusing to see how we can reduce our overall inventory to improve the overall inventory.
I think we should always give thanks to SKF. We've been long-time shareholders, and it's been an incredibly rewarding experience. And we held sort of 9% for a long time, it's dipped below that. And every once in a while, including sometimes now, I get tempted to sell just because you see the valuations. And it has never, ever been a rewarding experience to sell SKF.
True. Well, hopefully.
But it really is remarkable how well the company has done under many different managements. Every management has really, really impressed us. And I'm not saying that to butter you up, but it really is a great commentary of the strength of the business and of the company. So,
All right, thanks, guys.
thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Nice meeting.
Okay, I gotta go.
Sure.
My man, take care. Was rewarding for you?
Yeah, it was very
Okay. See you, man. Take care.
Yeah, see you.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. I don't have one more time. Small token of appreciation.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. You also are at Pune?
No, I'm based out of Bangalore.
Oh, after Bangalore, okay.
Yeah.
Also, it's like neck to neck.
No, tomorrow I have some work.
Okay.
So
Then it's okay. Otherwise, reaching airport at this time is a bit longer. That's not your card.
yeah, that's not. I think
Oh,
the
so-
Mile guys probably left it.
Oh.
You want to switch on the recording?
I'll
can
just
still up.
do that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do I return this to you? Or-
It's okay.
You did the doctor.
So you look at
Finance.
finance, okay. Yeah.
Just want to stop recording here.